Good evening, everyone. Thank you for hanging on for our delayed meeting this evening. It is April 26, 2022, and the time is now 7:04 p.m. So I call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Urban Design Commission is conducted by remote participation. We will make recordings available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. My name is Sarah Lewis, co-chair of the Urban Design Commission. We will start with a roll call of the commission members present. Frank Valdez. Frank actually has let us know that he will be absent this evening. Andrew Ava.
Present.
Tim Talon. I believe Tim will be joining us late this evening. Deborah Fennick.
Present.
Sherry Ruan.
Present.
And Tim Hood.
Present.
All right, that means we have a quorum. Also with me this evening is Courtney Korp of Public Space and Urban Forestry, who is also co-chairing, as well as Andrew Gurminski, as always, behind the scenes, our UDC liaison and planner with PPZ. So as far as design review goes, actually we don't have any meeting minutes to approve this evening, so we can go straight into design review. And our first case will be 256 through 260 Elm Street, which has been continued from April 12th, 2022. So Andrew, while you are unmuting the appropriate folks, I'm going to remind the commission that this is in the CC district. So the votes we have to take are whether the guidelines have been met for that district and whether to incorporate any additional design guidance.
This is Andrew
Sarah, I have a
Gurminski.
question.
For those presenting, if you could please use the raise hand feature. Thank you.
And Sarah, I haven't been here for any of the reviews for this project. Am I able to still vote on it, or?
I would actually, I don't think so, no. If you haven't listened to any of the recordings, then this is
I listened to one of the previous recordings, but I haven't been present for the meetings. So I don't know if that makes a difference.
As long as you have listened to the recordings, Andrew will make sure that you get an affidavit to sign that says you've listened to the recordings, then you may participate.
Okay.
Sarah, are you ready for us to start?
Yes, please go ahead. I wasn't sure that everybody was unmuted yet.
Excellent. So everyone can, let me make sure you can see my screen. Everyone can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, thank you all again for allowing us to join this evening. My name is Ryan Kurlbaum. I'm an architect with Perkins & Will. I'm also joined by principal at our office, Gautam Sundaram, who you've been hearing a lot from in regards to the civic space. Tonight, we will be talking about a few tweaks you have asked us to make on the architecture. And again, we always are using your feedback to help guide the developments. And just in knowing that also, I think a lot of the comments last time came about the detailing of the terracotta, about some of the tectonic gestures, and we certainly are keeping all of those in the back of our minds as we develop it, but we are just now entering design development. So we will certainly keep those details in mind as we move through it, but hopefully tonight you'll see implicitly, if not explicitly, all of your comments addressed. So last time what we heard when we met with you all on the 12th, some things that were approved that are not on this list, I just might highlight if you don't mind, that we talked about was that having terracotta cladding on both the Elm Street and Herbert Street sides. So that was something the committee spoke quite favorably of last time, which was great. And then the other condition was on the Elm Street corner, which I'll talk about in a second, where we kind of opened up a new porch condition to open up that corner, something that we think was a nice urban gesture and helped integrate the building even further with the civic open space. So tonight we're gonna talk, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Ryan. Sorry, this is Andrew G. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure, just to point out that Andrew Arbaugh, you actually should need to tell us what recordings you viewed before you can vote. I just wanted to make sure that you did that before we get any further into the presentation. So sorry for the interruption.
I read, it was one of them. Sorry, I know you guys forwarded it over to me. Let me see if I can find it.
Andrew, they're all riveting presentations, so it's can't miss UDC content. No, am I okay to go ahead, Sarah?
No, not yet. Just pause for a
Okay.
second.
Okay.
So Andrew, were you at the first meeting, which looks like it was 2/22?
No, that was the one where I was in Haverhill.
Okay.
Deanna Brown sent me. She sent me. She sent me the February 22nd one. I wasn't there for it, but she sent me that one. I watched that one. I did not watch last week's at all.
Okay. So, and you were not at last week's?
Or the one on the.
All right, then if you have not seen all of the videos, then you can't, you cannot vote. Now,
We still have quorum though, so it doesn't matter.
We do not have quorum on this particular item until Tim Talon shows up. Andrew, is that right? I think that is correct. Let me do a quick count. I think.
Sherry, when did you join on the board? I believe you weren't around when they first were heard.
She wasn't on that.
Yeah. Right. I
You
wasn't on that. Yep.
Yeah, then we don't have a quorum.
Okay, even when Tim shows, we don't have a quorum. All right.
Sarah, could we move them? Just move around the agenda?
Yeah. Well, no, because even when Tim comes on, we'll just have Deborah, Tim, and Tim that will be able to vote, which I don't think constitutes a quorum.
Do we have easy access to the recording for the 412? I'm recused on 2 projects, so if while those are presenting, I could listen to the 412 and make myself on.
All right, let's do that then. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. The meeting link is the easiest place to find it. So if you still have the agenda for that meeting handy, you can access it that way. I'm sorry, Elm Street team, we're going to bump you down the agenda just to make sure that we can continue the discussion on this legitimately this evening. Sorry about this. We had a last minute conflict with one of our commission members, and so that's sort of thrown our math off. So Ryan and Gautam, I hope you can, sorry about this. And I'm not on camera, I apologize. Speaking away, not being seen. If I think if we rearrange the agenda and deal with the Boynton projects first, then hopefully when Tim Talon joins us, then Andrew will have had time to review the recording, and we can go from there. So thank you all so much for your patience.
Thank you,
Problem.
Andrew, for listening to the recording in the meantime.
Can't wait.
All right, so in that case, we will put a pause on 256 through 260 Elm Street and come back to it later in the agenda. And we will, well, no, we still have if Andrew Alba is recusing himself, we still have a quorum issue.
We do the
Sarah, this is Andrew Grabinski. Why do we have a quorum issue? We have 3
don't-
voting.
Okay.
We
Don't
need 3
we?
voting members for quorum.
All right, sorry, I was doing the math and thought we needed 4. All right, then we shall go ahead. I apologize for giving everybody false alarms. All right, so the next one that we have on the agenda is 153 South Street. This is the thoroughfare 1 of Archibald Query Way in Boynton Yards. This is the, so if those who are ready to present, all right, perfect, that's going on in the background. I want to just let Andrew, do you have to recuse?
Yep, so I'm going to recuse. I'm actually going to fully drop out. Courtney, do you want to just text me when you want me back? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, bye.
Great, thank you. Andrew Abba is recused. And I just wanted to remind the commission that the NACTO design guidelines are what are the guidelines that we will be reviewing this project against and what we'll need to vote to, and then whether to incorporate any other design guidance. I'm going to let Courtney lead this part of the meeting. So Courtney, is there anything that you want to say about NACTO ahead of time, or?
Yeah. So I'm just curious if the commissioners have had a chance to familiarize themselves with NACTO, and specifically this will be a commercial shared street. And I'm happy to read off the design requirements from NACTO if that's helpful.
And let me do one thing too, for the record, for the audience. NACTO, N-A-C-T-O, is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and they issue a lot of design guides for streets and thoroughfares and very much urban design around safe, complete streets. Is that a safe assumption? Statement?
Yeah, and the writing of the Somerville zoning ordinance is specifically tailored to the different types of streets that NACTO has established. So this will be a commercial shared street according to their definition. And they list a number of design guidelines that they look for or recommend in terms of designing and planning for a shared street. So there's probably, I'm going to say like 15 different components that I'll read. So one is that a commercial Shared street shall have textured or pervious pavement that are flush with the curb to reinforce the pedestrian priority operation of the street and delineate a nonlinear path of travel or narrow carriageway. Second, special pavements, especially unit pavers, may be subject to additional maintenance costs and should be selected based on regional climate and long-term durability. 3, selection of snowplow compatible materials is recommended for colder climates. 4, drainage channels should be provided either at the center of the street or along the flush curb, depending on existing conditions and the overall street width. 5, drainage channels are often used to define the traveled way from the clear path. 6, commercial shared streets should be accessible by single unit trucks making deliveries. 7, where commercial alleys are non-existent, it may be advantageous to design a shared street to accommodate large trucks through significant changes to the design should be avoided. I think I'm on 8. Designated loading and unloading zones may be defined through differences in pavement pattern or use of striping and signage. 9, street furniture, including bollards, benches, planters, street lights, sculptures, trees, and bicycle parking may be cited to provide definition for a shared space, subtly delineating the traveled way from the pedestrian exclusive area. I think I'm on 10. Shared streets may be closed to through traffic for specific portions of the day. 11, use movable planters and time of day restrictions to regulate the shared space. 12, provide tactile warning strips at the entrance to all shared spaces. Warning strips should span the entire intersection crossing. I think I'm on 12, commercial shared streets restrict transit access. For pedestrian streets that provide direct transit access, consider the application of a transit mall. And I think I'm on 13. Depending on the overall street width, designers may consider providing a 3 to 5 foot clear path protected from traffic. The clear path should be defined using planters, bollards, and street furniture, as well as detectable warning strips or textured pavers. For narrower shared streets and alleys, use of a clear path is discouraged. So I think in total, thinking about a shared street, this is a space that is designed to accommodate vehicle traffic at very reduced numbers and very slow speeds, and pedestrians are free to cross wherever, and that there's a flush condition throughout the whole space. There are, just to review, since this is the first one, might as well all get on the same page. The standards for specific thoroughfare types in the Somerville zoning ordinance. Commercial shared street, there are three pieces. The commercial shared street thoroughfare type is referred to as a commercial shared street by NACDO, so we sort of covered that. The total commercial shared street right-of-way width must be a minimum of 52 feet. Total right-of-way width may be reduced by 7 feet for each parking lane that is not provided. So those are, that's our quick overview of a shared street. Do you guys have any questions before we have the people present?
No.
You good? I know I went through that fast.
All set.
And also, I think, you know, as we start to review some of these things, we can The UDC rules and regulations, the components for thoroughfares haven't quite been written yet, so we'll probably be looking for your input in the near future. All right, so Boynton Yards Thoroughfare 1 team, are you ready to go?
We are indeed. Thank you.
All right, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Courtney. And just to be clear, can you guys see the full screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for having me. My name is Ian Ramey. I'm with Copley Wolf Design Group. We're the landscape architects for the Boynton Yards project. And tonight we will be, go ahead.
Ian, this is Sarah Lewis. Do you mind being on camera while you're speaking?
Oh, sorry. Sure.
Thank you.
How's that? Whoop. It does it every time. I got to figure out where the, how I switch to the other view. Sorry about that.
You should have a picture in that spot as a backup.
Hang on, this is a different control for me. Found it. There I am. Okay, let me get back to this. One second. Now I can't see my screen. Hold on. Okay. All right, you guys are good. You can see it. Here we go. So tonight we are talking about Thoroughfare 1. This is our first UDC session for this. As Courtney mentioned, this is kind of the first thoroughfare that's gone through the process. So we're all kind of guinea pigs here and very excited to get into the process and have some good dialogue. Don't worry, I'm not going to read this to you. This was submitted as part of the application that we sent in prior to the presentation. We do have some highlights here that I just want to touch on the design narrative. So talking about the character and the features of the project, as Courtney mentioned, this is a commercial shared street that we are designing. It's going to prioritize the pedestrians and bicyclists. The way we have approached this, and we have cross sections that can show this, is that there are 3 zones that comprise the cross section of the thoroughfare. The first zone is the movement zone, 20 feet wide. That's the path of travel. We have a hybrid flex use zone, which it ranges in width from 12 to 15 feet. And then we have the pedestrian zone, which is basically the sidewalk that ranges in width from 8 to 12 feet. Our street can be easily closed and turned into a pedestrian-only environment. And then in terms of some of the other components here, we are designing for a cycling level of comfort, really trying to prioritize the bikes. We have bike parking for up to 64 spaces. We have accessibility objectives here where we are having a flush design to promote universal accessibility. We do have some dedicated van accessible parking spaces that we'll show you. We are using tactile warning pavers throughout to warn visually impaired users and to separate those pedestrian zones from the shared zones. We also have some sustainability objectives. We are specifying bioinfiltration planters along the southern edge of the street to help manage stormwater. We have 60 street trees that we are proposing, really trying to address some of the heat island concerns. We are proposing soil cells to maximize the growing medium for those trees. And we are trying to play up the understory planting to really have a good biodiverse and native heavy planting design. The category of historic design, we really don't have any considerations for that because this is a site that is really largely just sort of post-industrial use. However, we are making reference to and utilizing standards that relate not just to the city standards for streetscapes such as the lights, but also some of the master plan materials that we have presented previously and had approved. So there's a consistency in those materials. A quick look at our agenda. We went through our introduction. We'll look at some context. We'll talk specifically about some of our goals and the NACDO items. We'll walk through the design process, and then we'll highlight some of the aspects like the planting approach, We have some sections and 3D views to show you the experience, the look and feel. We'll talk about materiality, and then we'll get into some next steps and then have plenty of discussion. Where we are in the site plan application process. So here we are with the design review in blue in the spring. We had our first neighborhood meeting back on April 6th, which went really well. We got a lot of good feedback and a lot of support from the community. Following this, we'll obviously continue talking through the UDC process and through various departments at the city, including PSUP, mobility, and engineering, and then we'll get into the site plan or the special permit application and hopefully towards the planning board review decision. A look at our schedule. So we're in the orange here, still in conceptual design and permitting. We'll be here until the fall of this year. In the fall, we will get into the more detailed design and engineering, again, with those city departments. That'll take us through the second quarter to the beginning of the second quarter of 2023, when we hope to start construction. We're seeing this as a two-phase construction. The first part would be sort of the western side, Windsor Street to Earl. That'll be sort of a 6-month window. There'll be some overlap. And then there'll be the second component, which will be sort of the eastern portion of this, which will be Earl Street to Harding. And we're targeting an end of 2024 completion. Just looking at the regional context, you guys know where Boynton Yards is. Thoroughfare 1 is highlighted in yellow here. It is the northernmost east-west spine that runs through that development. And then zooming into the neighborhood context, again, the yellow highlights where Thoroughfare 1 is. You can see how it sits within the overall development of Boynton Yards and how it integrates with the existing street grid. The roads are shown with that solid pink line, and just want to note that the dashed pink line that you see below the development site is the location of the proposed future straightening and extension of South Street to link between Medford Street and Webster Ave. That's something that the mobility department and us are looking at as an improvement to the overall mobility of the neighborhood. A quick look at some of the existing conditions. As I mentioned, the site is really just sort of a very vast expanse of asphalt and concrete. It's really not a pedestrian-friendly place. The proposed thoroughfare is highlighted here in red. The site is home to Gentle Giant Movers, as well as other sort of single-story light industrial uses, a lot of trucks and parking lots. It's essentially a treeless landscape. And something that we're really trying to improve upon with the new design. So then we get into some of these goals. I think what's important to note that there's two unique aspects to this project. The first of which is that this is a privately constructed streetscape that then will get transferred to the city of Somerville to become a public thoroughfare. Normally these types of projects are, sort of fully publicly designed and constructed projects. The second aspect, and I think one that's really exciting, is that this will not be a traditional street as we understand it, with curbs and sort of car-dominated approach. The thoroughfare, as we touched on, is really going to be designed as a shared festival street. Really, its intent is that it's going to be a public space that prioritizes people, public realm activation, and green infrastructure over the cars. This was a concept that was presented to us from the city mobility group several months ago, and they asked us to look into this and develop it for the Boynton Yards project. The thoroughfare will eliminate the raised curb barriers to allow free and accessible movement by pedestrians throughout. We have strategic bollards, raised planters, and tactile paver strips to ensure safe pedestrian conditions. And through the design of this street, traffic in turn will be slowed and vehicular access through the corridor will be discouraged. This is the long-term vision of the city's mobility department. So with these progressive aspirations in play, there's many guidelines and toolkits available to design such a space, as Courtney had mentioned. So these are some of the guidelines that are associated with the NACTO standards. And just going through some of our project goals here. So Vision Zero is to obviously create a safe street for all users. We want to follow the NACTO shared street best management practices. We're focusing on pedestrian safety and experience. We're trying to maximize the tree canopy with a focus on the long-term street tree health. We're seeing the street as a sponge. We want to optimize green infrastructure performance. And then the street as a civic space, providing flexibility for everyday use and occasional uses. And then, of course, as this becomes a public street, we have to keep durability and maintenance in mind. So what will it look like? These are some precedent images that kind of get us to the look and feel of what this space will be. Starting with the upper left, the idea of having parking spaces defined by planter beds that kind of pop out and intermix with those plantings so that you don't, with those parking so that you don't have long runs of parking spaces. The lower left image shows a really good tree canopy. We really want to have that tree canopy cover the street and address the urban heat island effect. In the upper right, the idea of using different types of non-traditional street pavements, really to signify that it is a pedestrian prioritized space, not a space for cars. And then in the lower right, because the street can be shut down and turned into something other than just a street, the idea of activation, where you can imagine the street being shut down and being turned into a festival event. So here we are looking at our approved master plan for Boynton Yards, Thoroughfare 1 here sort of at the top of the screen, top middle, and really just trying to highlight in this scheme the amount of tree planting and the relationship of the thoroughfare to the civic spaces and how we view the thoroughfare as an extension of those civic spaces, really the connective tissue that weaves through and unifies that public realm. So when we first started this project, we looked at different scenarios of how we can really reduce the amount of parking, really prioritize pedestrians. So we started with this concept of alternating trees with the parking spaces. And in these schemes, we had 30 spaces, 26 spaces. And while that was sort of getting us to where we wanted to go, it wasn't really quite there yet. It really still felt like a street for cars, and then having a sidewalk on the sides. And that is not really what we're trying to do. We want to really interweave these components and really blur the line between the road and the sidewalk, essentially. So that brings us to our current plan. You can see that we've really sort of tried to cluster the amount of plantings and to break up those parking spaces as much as we can, but then also treating those parking spaces as opportunities for things other than just parking. So we're calling that the hybrid or the flex zone. Within those pods or areas where you could see bike parking, you could see movable seating that would be sort of spill out use that would happen from the first floor activated uses of the buildings. It could be opportunities where there's pop-up parklets that happen, really trying to blur that line between cars and the public realm for the pedestrians.
Ian, sorry to cut in. You've about 8 minutes left to present.
Okay, I'll go quick. Thank you. Again, the connection to the civic spaces is really important. You can imagine that those civic spaces kind of sweep across that thoroughfare and operate as a single public realm when the street is shut down. This highlights some of those key components. So the idea of the parking, we have 20 total spaces shown, 18 of which are regular, 2 are van accessible spaces shown with the blue. We have 64 permanent bicycle parking spaces highlighted in yellow, and you can see how those are distributed throughout. The idea of activation, so again, the street gets shut down at either end. Those parking spaces can be given over to tent setup, and you can have a community event that takes up that entire street and really becomes a wonderful community event. We mentioned the bioinfiltration, so the way the site is graded is from the north to the south or page up to down. That is sheet flowing towards those blue areas. Those blue areas are the bioinfiltration planters. They will take the stormwater and help manage that from a pollutant standpoint, but also just from a uptake of the plants, reducing the load on the city's stormwater system. In terms of the tree caliper, we first looked at this following city standards. That would produce, based on the zoning, about 41 trees at the standard 2-inch diameter or caliper size. That would produce about 82 caliper inches. We're trying to be much more robust here, so we have 60 trees at a 3-inch DBH, which yields 180 caliper inches, so much more significant biomass than the zoning standards. Again, we have the blue bioinfiltration beds. The green beds are what we're calling resilient streetscape planters. Those are not bioinfiltration, but they still need to be very durable, tolerant of urban conditions. Our planting goals, obviously maximize tree canopy, committing to a minimum 50% native species, focusing on the long-term health and survivability. Maintenance is a concern, and then maximizing ecological value with habitat and pollinator supporting species. This is a list that we've been developing following the standards that PSUF has for street trees, trying to look at areas where we can use trees in the wet areas, but also not just shade trees, have the flowering trees to have that understory component, that tiered approach, and also having greater flowering capacity for the pollinators. Here's some shots of some of the non-bio-infiltration planting. Again, a lot of the known players in terms of really tough plantings to be able to survive those urban conditions. And then the bio-infiltration species, again, these can tolerate dry and wet conditions and also have flowering component for the pollinators. Now we'll get into some quick sections to cut through. So the first section is cut through building 2 and building 5. You can see the components, the 20-foot wide thoroughfare, which is the movement zone, the 14-foot and 15-foot hybrid zone shown in green. You can see that where we don't have the parking, we have the silvacells to maximize the soil volume. And then on either side, we have the pedestrian zones, which are shown with that sort of cream color. Here's a section cut through the 2 civic spaces. You can see how those open spaces on either side can really flow across this flush curb condition and really act as a single open space. And then a section cut through building 3 and the recessed courtyard on the proposed building 6. And now we just have a series of quick 3D views that kind of get at the idea of what this will feel like. This is a slightly elevated view looking at the street with civic space 1 to the left and civic space 3 to the right. Here's a view at street level showing the density of planting and the ins and outs of the parking spaces and the little pods of flex zone. Here's a shot from the sidewalk side looking back. You can see how we're using the standard benches to define seating areas and backing that up with vegetation. Here's a shot that would show an event taking place. So again, those parking spaces would be closed to vehicles and tents could be set up to support a community event. And here's another shot looking at some of the movable furnishing that could be put in those parking spaces. And then in terms of the materiality, these are the materials that are approved and what we're using throughout the master plan development. So again, like the signature bench, which is the wood sinuous bench in the upper left-hand corner, the bike racks, the ornamental bollards, of course, the street lights that are the standard, and then the furnishing zone components, which will be permeable pavers, the tree guards, and those color ranges that we're using. Here's some other precedent images of what that activation and that edge could be between the street itself and the pedestrian zone. And then some images of how the bioinfiltration in those planters could be detailed in terms of getting water into those areas so that we can manage the stormwater more effectively. So next steps, here we are today presenting UDC. We have our neighborhood meeting number 2 coming up. And so by the fall, summer fall of 2022, we expect and hope to be in front of the planning board hearing and moving forward with design development towards that construction that we reviewed. And that's it. Hopefully I came in on time. Thank you.
Just from a procedural perspective, so Sarah or Andrew, does Ian have to come back before us with a more definitive design, since this is, you know, schematic, so to speak? Or is the intent for us to comment on this and then if we're ready, take a vote now?
I'll let Courtney add more detail, but I believe this is, we still have to do the design comments, although there will be a whole lot more detail that are probably worked out with engineering as the design gets further developed. But if the concept for the urban design is is acceptable, that's what we need to vote on rather than the actual details. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is just you know, in a similar trajectory as a civic space. So, you know, the point of this is to really advise the conceptual design so that, you know, when it's approved by the planning board, that then they would seek a civic or a thoroughfare construction permit that is issued through engineering that would ensure that the technical construction components of the street would be up to the standards that engineering requires of our public right-of-way streets. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
yep. And then this is being designed, and then Ian, you said given to the city, so
Correct.
they'd be responsible for operation and maintenance.
I think there may be an agreement in place where some of that maintenance would be handled by the developer, but maybe Rolla can speak to that if it's not correct.
Yeah, that is correct, but that's not that's not necessarily something. We just need to talk about the urban design tonight. But yes, it will be maintained, and there are by the development team, and there are covenants that are in place to make sure that happens in perpetuity.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know it's not about maintenance, and yet if it's not maintained, the design falls apart. So I want to make sure like what we're looking at is the,
Yeah.
you know, how it will sustain. Okay. Thank you. That's
Understood.
helpful.
Also, for the record, I want to note that Tim Talon joined us at the beginning of the presentation. He was not on camera, but he has been listening in and will be able to join the discussion and vote should we want to take any votes this evening.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Which is, yes, and I'm not sure you addressed this, Ian, but I'm wondering how solar orientation, given the heights of the buildings on the south side of the thoroughfare, you know, how that plays into the concept design and how that'll be, you know, in what do you call it, informing, you know, development of the design also.
Right, for sure there will be shadows from the buildings on the south side. I think we need to be very careful about our selection of plant species in those areas because there will be restricted access to light basically. I think that in the clear spaces between the buildings where we have the civic spaces and the cross streets that go north-south, there's a really good solar orientation for that. So I think that's not really going to be an issue, but on the north sides of those buildings, we definitely need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, so will you be using different species on the south side of the thoroughfare and, you know, less, I don't know what else, you know, what else that would inform, but I could imagine this being, you know, having a bias to it or having a different, you know, something that, something affected by that orientation.
Yeah, for sure the species selection will change between which area we're planting and where that that sun is going to be. I think that's probably the main factor that we would have to take into consideration.
So it doesn't affect the infiltration areas or anything?
No,
like that.
no, the whole site is still graded the way it's going to be graded. So the water can still be infiltrated on the south side. It just makes sense the way the entire site pitches that's how that should be. You know, the species can still be more shade tolerant and still function in those bioretention areas.
Yeah, and also in terms of street furniture and functions might happen, different things might happen on the north side of the street versus the south side. I was just curious. I didn't see any sort of reflection of the orientation, but I think it is going to probably play into where people want to be and things like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. We may want to prioritize more parking in the shadier areas, and then where there is better solar aspect, have that be more of the activated use.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have any other questions from the commissioners at this point?
Yeah, I had, go ahead, Tim.
In regards to the retention of water and sloping of the street, in kind of like a big picture conceptual, was there like a target percentage that you were going for to control water on site versus sending to stormwater system, or is that still being looked at?
There wasn't a target. We tried to kind of maximize as much as we could, but also working with kind of the existing utilities that were out there. There is some infrastructure and drainage that's out there that would suggest that some of those plant beds that we have on the south side wouldn't be well suited to be infiltrated beds. So we basically figured out, in coordinating with a civil engineer, what made the most sense in terms of the street grades and where that drainage infrastructure would be. And tried to, basically maximize or optimize the amount of bioinfiltration areas. But there's no target of like, we're taking X amount. We tried to get as much as we could given the way the site was graded and where those utilities are.
Okay, and then my second question was about street lighting. If there was a concept for that.
Yes, so we will be using the city standard, those kind of more traditional looking fixtures, the Acorn. We haven't done a detailed layout yet, but those will be located within that furnishing zone, and we'll ensure that we have the proper spacing, working with engineering on that.
Okay, yeah, just because there are a lot of trees, and just how that works with all the trees and the different movement zones.
Sure. Yeah, those lights will be located between those planter masses. It may be that they kind of alternate on either side of the street to make sure that we have that good light distribution and cover all aspects of the pavement that we need to for safety.
Okay, thank you.
Tim Talon?
Thank you for the presentation, Ian. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the aspiration to create a street that prioritizes pedestrians and people, and the landscape forward approach to street design. I think so often we see streets that are engineered and then landscape kind of gets layered onto that or tacked onto it. Appreciate that kind of upfront thinking about that. But I did have a question kind of from a traffic engineering perspective. Is there a traffic impact analysis that's been done for, I guess, this specific street or more broadly in Boynton Yards that would speak specifically to what the traffic volumes are anticipated to be on this street, where vehicles are going to be approaching from?
There's definitely traffic studies that have been done for the overall development. I haven't participated in any with respect just to Thoroughfare 1. I know that they're anticipating that the bulk of the travel is coming from the western side, from the Union Square side, heading towards the thoroughfare. But I think the general thought process there is that they really do want to sort of deter people driving onto Thoroughfare 1. So the idea is that as that traffic comes from the west side, it would turn down Windsor Street, which is that western most north-south road, and get down to South Street and into the infrastructure from that aspect.
Okay. So I guess that kind of leads to my second question. I think what would be really helpful is a site plan that shows entrances to parking and loading areas, to see again where vehicles would be traveling to, as well as a plan that shows the ground floors of buildings, at least the portions that are fronting on the streets, both those that have been designed and those that, at least an idea of what's happening on the north side of the street as well. And I'm thinking specifically of, I know the NACTO guide talks a lot about accommodating delivery vehicles and things like that. So I'm thinking where delivery vehicles would be pulling up, what spaces they would need to be accessing, building lobbies, and then really important component, which is rideshare.
Yeah, Tim, let me add a little bit of of information to that for the bigger picture, which is, sort of outside of the discussion right now. Basically, the residential building to the north has, that's the only one that we don't know necessarily, but it's imagined that there will be a driveway on the right-hand side of this plan extending Harding Street that will access the loading and parking for that one. There will not be, because it's a pedestrian street, there will not be any curb cuts to access loading and parking from thoroughfare 1. Everything to the existing, the 101 South Street is done from Earl Street. And so that will also be servicing the next building, building 3. But there can't be any curb cuts. The other building, building 5 to the north, that driveway is actually what's shown on this particular drawing is incorrect at the moment. We have worked out a shared driveway that extends Windsor Street between the US 2 600 Windsor Street document. 600 Windsor Street project and the building 5. So there will only be one driveway there, and that sort of aligns with Windsor Street as an extension. So minimizing the, basically no curb cuts, only sort of street extensions.
If I can just hop in here as well, this is Rola with Leggett McCall, the development team. So I just wanted to note that actually there's no difference here between curb and road because this is a curbless condition. So it's all at 1 grade. And to the question of ground floor activation, we actually had that slide in this deck. I don't know if it's missing, but Ian, you had a slide that showed all the ground floor plans of these buildings and how they relate to the thoroughfare. So we can send that over.
Yeah, you must have lost it.
Yep.
Yeah.
We do have that as part of our master plan anyway, and we do have circulation diagrams that we can send over to you anytime right after this meeting.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So pending no additional questions, I just want to remind the commission that for thoroughfares, you as the Urban Design Commission will be providing advice and recommendations to inform the advancement of the proposed schematic design through design development and to address the achievement of the mobility division's goals for thoroughfare design and street network planning, as well as providing advice and recommendations concerning the satisfaction of the NACDO design standards and guidelines. And third, identifying any outstanding concerns and providing advice and recommendations on how the proposed thoroughfare affects the quality of Somerville's public realm. So with that in mind, I will open it up for comments and recommendations and advice and concerns.
So one question, well, maybe not a question, a comment. You had a slide that talked about the material palette. The material of the 20-foot wide thoroughfare itself, is that intended to be asphalt or is it?
It will be a mix, Tim. I think at the primary crossings between the civic space, it will most likely be a unit paver, a vehicular rated paver of some sort. And at the edge of end of Earl Street as well as Harding Street. In between those areas, it'll likely be a type of stamped asphalt or maybe a stamped concrete. We don't envision that it would be just plain unadorned asphalt.
But is the idea that there would be a consistency of materiality? Again, that idea of the shared street kind of blurring the boundary between pedestrian and the street zone, a similarity in color or tone.
Correct, yeah, and there would be, through the entire zone, there would be a detectable warning, a tactile strip that would run between the street area and the pedestrian zone.
And then how do bikes move through the space? You know, there's not a dedicated lane for them. I presume it's a shared lane, but
Yeah, they have free reign to go through the entire cross section, basically. So the idea is that it's really, you know, deters the vehicles from driving through there. They go very slow. They have to be careful. They have to be cognizant of pedestrians and bikes. It's not a striped lane configuration at all. It's a complete section for peds and bikes.
is there a speed limit? Vehicular speed limit?
We haven't discussed that with engineering. I assume that they would have some type of signage or some type of a maximum speed that they would allow.
Mm-hmm. And you've got bike parking. I mean, this is, as you advance this, I imagine that there are other micro modes that you'll want to accommodate, like scooters, which are be messy depending on, whether they're a shared system or individual ones. But I don't know of any kind of locking system for scooters, but, there are lots of micro modes that are, that would presumably be used in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to follow up on a comment you made earlier, Tim, just about the right of way that can be accessed by a vehicle and these aprons, if you will, that are connecting the civic spaces. It's interesting because they almost detract from the mission of making the corridor feel like it's pedestrian prioritized, because it's making these moments that then read as different and special and maybe more pedestrian. I don't know if there's a way through your material strategies that take away or allow there to be a little bit more of a distributed feel around that material selection from one end of the court to the other, instead of these doormats almost that are connecting clear park and pedestrian space. You know what I mean? Like it almost feels like hey, now we're in the real pedestrian zone, but the rest of this is sort of quasi. If you're really prioritizing pedestrian, is there a way? Is it concrete with a cast aggregate or something that really just reduces the industrial level of material legibility?
I think that's actually a great point, and it's something that we've brought up multiple times as we've kind of developed these plans. Representation wise, at least, you immediately fall into that question of how do you represent this thoroughfare and make it bleed exactly like you're saying, both horizontally and vertically across these spaces. And it proved to be difficult in how you render these plans, which makes us think like, what should this material be? And so exactly what you're saying. And also when we first saw the renders that Ian and Copley Wolf had done, it's apparent that this needs to bleed more and that material should be kind of one. We're hesitant to say that it's all paver because paver with the weather and all gets torn up. So I would say, we're going to try to push and make this whole thing one same surface. So if we can do stamped concrete or something that works for us, and we can do that the whole length, I think that's preferable.
Yeah, I think just as an example, right, the idea of like a concrete pour, even if it is like a cast aggregate that's a little more sparse in some areas, and then the density increases in these zones. So it is truly like a density of texture. I always hesitate with the stamped concrete, not that I don't think it's possible here, but I feel like it's harder to get a beautiful gradient that looks really intentional because
Yep.
it's such a strict unit. So it's almost like if you were to take, you know, in some cases, we've seen things pressed into the concrete, like leaves or reeds or whatever. That gives you more control, creative control. The
Yep.
density can increase and it all can read as this really beautiful, consistent gradient of texture and density that goes from looser to tighter to looser to
Mhm.
tighter. And then I feel like that's feeling really clearly like, yep, pedestrian zone, cars are invited guests. And anyway, I think
Yeah,
you guys
no,
are on the right
thank you.
track. I would just
Yeah,
add
that's
that as a advice.
Yeah, definitely worth exploring. Thank you.
Good comment.
I'm wondering about the reality of vehicular speeds on the street too. I'm thinking about our shared streets and not our shared street, our yield streets in residential neighborhoods, which often have widths that are less than 20 feet between parked cars on either side, two-way streets, where it's 18 feet or 17 or 16, and cars kind of have to pull off to the side and yield to other cars. We still have issues in neighborhoods with vehicular speeds and cars whipping down the streets at 30, 35 miles an hour. So in this case, it's 20 feet, which is 2 10-foot lanes. So I'd imagine there'd be a reason to proceed somewhat cautiously if vehicles are traveling in both directions. But if it really is a street where some vehicle traffic's light, there'd still be the ability to travel pretty fast. I wonder if you studied any further traffic calming measures like chicaning, like actually jogging the alignment of the street as it goes down.
We did look at that a little bit, you know, with the development of the building parcels and sort of how those laid out on the master plan. We kind of arrived at this layout. I think the idea of the chicane was something that we looked at in terms of, you know, trying to have that feel just by having the alternating planting and parking and the visual cue that having those parking pods sort of presented out at the street almost duplicates that that realignment, that kind of cue to people, because it's just not a consistent condition on both sides of the street for drivers. They have to pay attention to the fact that there's this vertical element, whether it be plantings or what have you, that are kind of projecting out.
I was wondering about where the civic spaces meet. The building forms seem to make it, you know, if you're standing in one of the spaces, the space is going to read across the street. But just looking at kind of like the locations of the bio infiltration planters, there seem to be more of like a throat. So it does kind of feel to me as if it's kind of like space A and space B, whereas if it did want to be more open at one point, and you know have program kind of go across the street and kind of be a more joint space, it does feel like a bit of a more of a narrow throat. I'm just wondering if there's different options to make that those spaces feel more connected.
By not pinching down the planting as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead, Tim.
I was also just kind of looking at the space of the arcade. It was already kind of touched upon how the space spacing of kind of like the bike parking and the biospheres are kind of like a finger that extends out into the street. I was I was trying to envision what the space below the arcade would be in terms of the material and how that would marry with the thoroughfare and what's shown here. If it would be more of like a similar material, or if there'd be like a line of delineation in color and all that.
So the pavers in the arcade would be the same material palette as what's being used in those flex hybrid zones. So there would be a consistency in the texture and the color palette of those. We are required to have a continuous concrete accessible route for pedestrians. That's something that engineering was pretty adamant about. So we have that zone is at least 6 feet wide that provides the clear accessible route for pedestrians on both sides of the thoroughfare. What we're trying to do with the arcade is sort of have it not just be a stripe, though, just a parallel thing. We're trying to break that up a little bit and introduce those shapes between the concrete and the paver so that it really starts to feel a little bit more organic and interesting.
So the just so I understand, the area below the arcade is being designed under this project, or is that being designed separately?
That's designed separately under the Building 2 808 Windsor project. So that's already gone through the review. But you know, the sort of non-geometric or the more organic line that you're seeing, that's where the pavers are, and then the crosshatch that you see is concrete, and that extends up to the edge of the furnishing zone.
I'm just gonna note the time that we've definitely gone a little over our typical comment period, which seeing that this is the first thoroughfare, we sort of figured that was going to happen. But I just want to check in with you all and see if this is the moment that you are prepared to make a motion for the design recommendations that have been given so far, or are you, would you like this project to come back? Please let me know. Speak your mind.
I have one more comment. It'll be quick, maybe before we talk about that, and it's just related to the bike parking. Something I remember coming up, Ian, when we talked about Civic Space 1, and that is if I'm biking here, I'm probably, and I'm going to the Civic Space, and I think Civic Space 1 is going to be a great space, and hopefully it draws people to come here by bike. I'm probably biking all the way there, like not getting to the threshold at close to Windsor Street, parking my bike and then walking to Civic Space 1. You're biking until you kind of have that visual sight of where you're going at Civic Space 1. So I wonder either as part of Civic Space 1 or Civic Space 3 at the edges of that space, or in the space of the street, whether it's possible to add bike racks there as well, maybe together with thinking about Tim Hood's comment about opening that up a little more. There's the opportunity to locate some bike racks there.
Yeah, I think for sure there is, particularly at this intersection between the civic spaces and the thoroughfare. Again, just as a reminder, like on the southern side, the southern end of Building 1, 101 South and 808 Windsor, there's a lot of bike parking on that end of the civic space too. It doesn't happen to necessarily fall within the parcel limits of the civic space. It's within the building parcel limits. But I think that's a good comment to maybe have a cluster of bike parking on this northern side of Civic Space 1, off of the thoroughfare, within the thoroughfare, I should say.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I think that larger circulation diagram would help. Just thinking about people coming from Somerville, they're going to come in through Columbia Street and directly down this street, probably not around Windsor and South Street.
Yep.
All right, how are you feeling, commissioners? Would you like to make a motion about the recommendations tonight, or would you like to make a motion to continue this project?
So
I
for
think-
me, I think there's been a number of really good specific recommendations tonight that just could be documented and made. But I mean, for me, I would like to see the larger circulation diagram to better understand the approaches, as well as that ground floor plan. I question the location of drop-offs, the locations of ride share, those things which I think are going to be pretty important to the success of the street. It would be great to be able to talk about that as well.
Is that something that we can share with you guys, or how do we transmit that?
Yeah, Tim, are you requesting that this team come back with that information, or are you proposing to vote on design recommendations? I don't know, I think Sarah and Andrew Graminsky in the past, have we ever done sort of written comments later, or?
I think this is something that we can handle as a follow-up, but I don't think it should actually affect the design. So I mean, if it's something that we want to recommend as a condition to the planning board, we can handle it that way. My inclination is since there's a lot of detail work still left to go to be done on this, if we're comfortable with the schematic design, we should vote this evening.
Yeah. I guess my thought is that it is something that could potentially affect the schematic design, but I'd be interested in hearing the other commissioners' thoughts as well.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Tim. I think it could impact the design. I think it would be helpful to see it and just understand how it works cohesively with the rest of the pieces. I mean, I think it's a strong proposal. It does just feel like those circulation components and the connectivity are an important part of making sure this works. And just, yeah.
Can I ask Rola a question? I mean, do you know right now, as far as ride share and things like that will happen? I remember on building 1, it was intended to happen sort of on when there was a drive in front of Civic Space 1. Is that still there? Can you
Correct,
talk
yeah.
through where those might occur?
Yeah, so right now, most of the rideshare is on South Street for building 1. Building 3, we imagine the same. And then the only potential drop-offs here would happen at building 5, building 6. But, you know, we can address that when we get to those. Those are 2 pieces that aren't designed today. As it relates to actual circulation, it's pretty simple. And again, we can send you this plan, but like Ian said, the aim is to direct all car traffic down Windsor and off to South. And especially as that South Street becomes realigned to fit the grid, I think we envision most traffic happening there. That South Street realignment will cut through and connect Medford to Webster, further enforcing that traffic to pass through there and not through Thoroughfare 1. So as much as possible, that road aims to be bike ped focused. So if you're coming by bike off of Webster and arriving through Thoroughfare 1, you know, and we are working with our neighboring developers as well on the extension of the thoroughfare. So Windsor Place and how that connects to Webster. You know, you're going to ride your bike through that where Ian is pointing and through Thoroughfare 1, come down Harding, either go through Ward or come down and connect to an actual raised cycle track that we have on South Street. Either go back South Street to Webster, or you can actually go the other way to Medford. And again, all this is illustrated in our master plan and was part of the permitting to get here. So we have all those drawings ready. We can share those. Another thing I'll note is we have, as part of this master plan, a condition to locate 19 blue bike station docks. So those will be located in Civic Space 2, likely somewhere around Civic Space 3. So those also allow for more bike focused, parking, and further bringing in more bikes to Thoroughfare 1 and less cars. I don't know if that answers most of your question, but I feel like the circulation diagram will not really affect how we've thought of design of this thoroughfare, because we've envisioned that only bikes and peds are frequenting this road and less cars. I think that's what I'll say. As for ground floor activation, most of our retail lobbies and some of our lobbies front this thoroughfare, and we've tried to maintain it as such because we know that this is a pedestrian thoroughfare. So building 3 has, and you'll see that in the next presentation, has retail activation on the north side, as well as a through lobby that connects there. Building 1 has retail as well on the north side and A space. Building 2, same thing, retail, A space, and the lobby. Building 5 will also have the same as we designed that, same as building 6A, 6B, which has a great courtyard, and I think all that will be retail activated. So retail fronts the whole thoroughfare. That's something we're super aware of, and we're making sure that that is the case for all the buildings that front it.
So would you guys like to motion to vote on design recommendations, or would you like this project to come back?
So I appreciate the explanation, Rola. That's helpful. It's a lot of information and a lot of variables that maybe it's tough for me to visualize without seeing it on the plan. But I think it would be great if we had the opportunity to see that and discuss. And again, I think this is a very strong proposal, but it is important. I think that we have the opportunity to talk through all these things and give us the best possible chance of working. So my preference would be the motion for it to come back.
Yeah, and I second it, and I agree, Tim, that and then we've been talking about a lot of activities that solar orientation is going to change, or bike parking, and now we understand frontage, the frontage scenarios. I think more detail. I think to inform the detail of this advancing beyond concept, I do think it's important to see it again.
All right.
Second.
So the motion has been made to continue this project to the next meeting, and seconded by Deborah. I will call roll call vote. Tim Talon.
Yes.
Deborah Fennick.
Yes.
Sherry Ruane.
Yes.
Tim Hode.
Yes.
All right, this project will come back and share some additional information with the commissioners, and I would say if some of the concerns and recommendations that they've discussed, if you guys can perhaps try to work through some of those items, I think that would be good.
Sure.
Great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Sarah, am I handing this back to you for building 3?
That is a very good question. Let me navigate back to my agenda so I can get my head in the game. Yes, the next project is 99 South Street, the lab building. So that's going to be, what we're going to be voting on here is preferred massing, the preferred facade. Have the design guidelines been met for the high-rise district? And whether we are going to incorporate any additional design guidance. All right, so Rola, the floor is yours. Oh, it went away.
So David, we lost your screen, but I'll do a quick intro here. So this is building 3. Most of you know our building 1, building 2. We came before you for those. So we have a different architect on this building, CBT, and David Nagahiro from CBT will be presenting. Have Ian from Copley Wolf who do the piece on landscape. As our previous building 2 presentation, we are excited about this building, so we have a lot of slides. So I'm gonna hand it over to David real quick, and he'll hopefully fly through so that we can give you guys your time back. So David, all yours.
Okay, thank you. As Rola had mentioned, I'm David Nagahiro. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Let's see. So just by way of introduction, David Nagahiro, CBT, looking at the overall design for Building 3, which is 99 South. We'll look at the context in the community kind of space, schematic massing concepts, the architectural approach preferring preferred massing. Ian will talk about the landscape. We'll talk a little bit about the facade concepts and the different options that we looked at. And then the kind of idea of base, middle, top, the podium design, and then zoning compliance diagrams as well. You know, I won't go through this like Ian had mentioned. I'll mention a few of the highlights. This is a lab life science building at 356,000 square feet. You know, the design for this was really interesting when we started looking at the site, you know, walking around, finding inspiration from the unique kind of industrial Somerville site. You know, the goals were really looking at architecture, feel like it was really rooted in the site and clearly represented Somerville's future. The industrial past kind of combined with the creative arts and innovation lab space for the future. We'll talk a little bit more of the context. The public realm, you know, really continuing the vibrant and active uses along South Street, Harding, Thoroughfare 1, as well as Earl, and the idea of having the primary entrance at the South Street and Harding, and we'll take a look at that as well. You know, we were really looking at the lion's share of the space around the plan to be the retail and arts and creative enterprise. The overall massing strategy was really looking at a master strategy, really breaking down the scale and preserving the simple sort of elegance of the new industrial typology. For the facades, we were looking at the repetitions and the cadence of the reflective of the simple, elegant industrial facades of the past, and really looking at a tone of the architecture, the material palette that was inspired by kind of the richness and the warmness of traditional materials. On the sustainability side, you're really looking to be very ambitious with that and following the Somerville Summer Vision 2040, and this will be a LEED Platinum certifiable building. Just any questions? Just by way of orientation, very similar to what Ian had shown, the idea of the green line extension, the relationship of the building in relationship to the rest of the massing. Looking in plan in relationship in proximity to Union Square, and the idea of the proximity to the T makes it, you know, very attractive from a a transportation-oriented development, the Boynton Yards master plan. As we pull in more closely, again, the proximity to Union Square, the T-stop to the north. In relationship to 101 South, the civic space that we just talked about, Thoroughfare 808 Windsor, you know, 99 South will be just to the east of 101. The existing condition, in the middle you see building 1, which is almost completing construction. Building 2 is currently under construction with the civic space between the two, and adjacent to it will be building 3. One of the things that we loved as we were kind of looking at the site and walking through the neighborhood is that real sense of community and the idea of really perpetuating that idea of creating pedestrian and bike-oriented spaces and streets, and the fantastic gardens, and really the ambition to create spaces that can gather. We know that the open spaces, we're really looking at not only passive spaces, but active spaces, thinking about the safety and security at night and the lighting, the idea of being able to stroll down the streets is and very pedestrian oriented is something that we really looked at prioritizing. For the building itself, really looking at a warm material palette, one that really felt like it was kind of rooted in this particular location, continuing the things like the arcades, which create that kind of transition between the outdoor and the indoor spaces. The upper right is that idea of transparency at the ground plane and really being able to allow that kind of ground floor to participate with the public realm. And then the scale transitions, and you'll see how we're looking at creating scale on the building and this kind of stepped zipper kind of zone that creates a transition in the massing. And then outdoor roof terrace that also provides that space for outdoor use, especially post-COVID being very important. The schematic massing, some quick little sketches of the overall plan, thinking about those setbacks and terracing, really creating those scale transitions. It was interesting to think about the realignment of South Street and the idea of that network of green spaces that we were just talking about, and how Thoroughfare has the opportunity of kind of stitching those spaces together. Using elements like arcades to provide that kind of transition between the plazas themselves, the pedestrian zones and the retail inside, and then streets like Harding where the spaces can actually open out onto the sidewalk and really activate them at the same time. A few quick sketches. The one on the top left is the idea of aerial looking down along South Street. The idea of the large setback, the idea of having a plaza that really kind of becomes this forecourt and that kind of transition to the building. The idea of having the arcade at the base of the building, the scaling elements of the 4-story setback, creating outdoor open space on the 4th floor as well. Looking at the massing, and we looked at a number of different iterations, but really focused in on 3 that we're really starting to think about the scaling and transition from the neighborhood to the area to the north. We looked at 3 options for the overall massing. The first was looking at something that was a little bit more horizontal. The idea of the transition between the triple deckers on one side and transitioning back and having that kind of separation of scale. The second was looking at maybe a combination of horizontal and verticality and bringing some of the glass line down to the ground at the same time, as well as having the horizontal. And then the third was really this kind of transition of a stepped mass. So going from the south, the 4-story, and stepping back up to the north to the higher massing that we have to the north of the site. We are looking at the preferred massing, which is we're calling the zipper, which is also the stepped massing. Again, looking at the massing, overall massing strategies, the site itself, and the massing height and setback envelope. Looking at the third diagram of really setting the building back from the north side as well as the south side, providing that great kind of forecourt and entry plaza. Also creating the arcade along the base of the building and the setback of the building at the 4-story scale. And then starting to think about how the building is kind of pulled apart, creating that transition from the lower scale to the south to the taller scale to the north. I'll quickly go through this, but zoom in just a second, but you can again see the relationship between 808 Windsor, the Civic Space 1, 101 South, and then 99 South at the same time. To the north of the plan, we have Thoroughfare, where we have the opportunity for that double loaded activity. Harding Street is also a street that we find to the opportunity to really create that activation. South Street is where we're talking about eventually having that realignment where it continues straight across and makes that connection from her to Medford Street. And then also that front yard, the opportunity of having that kind of a gracious setback and that forecourt to create that transition from the street to the building itself and the alignment of the arcade. Some sketches looking at from the south. This is the south side of the building. Again, the idea of having that very broad sort of front yard or that front plaza the transition to the arcade and the space within. The lower right-hand sketch is that the two-story scaling element for the entry to the building on the corner of Harding and South Street, and then an image of the two-story lobby within. Also from the north side, looking at thoroughfare 1, this is where we have that kind of pedestrian, still having pedestrian kind of setback and that ample zone for pedestrian movement, great street furniture that helps kind of create opportunities for pause, and then the idea that the building itself and the retailer actually have a space to spill out to activate the ground plane as well. The bottom right sketch is along Harding Street, the idea of having that kind of arts and a creative enterprise space that kind of open up and spill out into the space to visually have that transparency and really activate the street. As we pull in a little bit closer to the plan itself, on the left-hand side, we have South Street, which is a complete street with the bicycle movement. Again, the setback along that edge. So we have dedicated, pedestrian zones, planting zones, areas for the to take in the stormwater, the places for sitting, and then the arcade as well. One of the things that we're looking at is really concentrating the loading docks and ramp very much in keeping with 101. So trying to compress that as much as possible so that we could take the lion's share of the exposure along the south, along Harding Street, and along Thoroughfare to have that retail and arts and creative enterprise space. The entry to the building will be at the corner, a two-story entry at the corner of South Street and Harding. The idea of also having a passageway from Thoroughfare. So thinking about pedestrian movement from Union Square and the T, coming down, being able to activate it with pedestrians and bike, but having a bit of a cut through here, opportunity here to get into the lobby as well, and then activating it on the inside as well. Looking at also where we do have zones of exposed area that possibly having art and mural walls as well. As we move up into the plan, this is the second floor, the idea that we have a two-story lobby and then very regularized floor plate, and then the upper plans where we also have the setback on the upper floors. And I'll turn it over to Ian for the landscape.
Thank you, David. Hello again. I'll go very quickly through this. I think David did a very good job of describing the site plan. Just want to highlight some features. So on the south side of the building, we have the 5,000 square foot plaza that picks up on a lot of the energy that you see on the 101 South project. So we have
Ian, let me interrupt for a second. So yes. Is that plaza an actual civic space? Is it on a separate lot?
It's a separate lot.
Okay, in which case we cannot talk about it with the building. So if you could focus on your the actual building site, I think that would be best.
Sure. So that lot kind of goes right through the middle of the plaza. So on the building side of the plaza, we have 4 large trees that are in the plaza with movable seating around it. That open space then transitions into that covered arcade. So there's a varying degree of enclosure for people using the open space. Harding Street, we have our typical street tree section with the Silvacells and the permeable pavers. Of course, on the north side along Thoroughfare 1, we have that activated public realm that engages with those first floor uses. And then on Earl Street, that's being treated as more of a service condition, really kind of mirroring the condition on 101 South, where we have a vegetated edge out at the edge of the street and then a pedestrian sidewalk up against the building. So next slide. A quick look at the green score. You can see on the left-hand side how that parcel line lays out. So again, the way the parcel lines are so tight to the building in these developments, it's difficult to get to the minimum score, but we are able to do that through a combination of soil depths, large trees, and also potentially using some green roof areas to bump us up in that engineered landscape category. So we meet the minimum, exceed it by just a bit. Next slide. And then we have some quick sections around the building. I think they kind of speak for themselves. You see the relationship of the right-of-way to the plaza, the bioinfiltration, and then the plaza that gets into the arcade of the building. And then a section through Thoroughfare 1 and the north side of the building. Again, you can see the relationship of that flex hybrid zone to the furnishing zone, and then that activated first floor spill out space along the north side of the building. And then a section through Harding Street, you can see the condition there where we're transitioning down to that existing residential building on the right-hand side. And then the section at Earl Street, again, really prioritizing the planting out at the edge of that service alley to kind of take the curse off that use there. All the same materials for the most part. I think the only twist here is that in the plaza, we are proposing what we're calling playful seating at the corners where you enter in, really trying to have a kind of interesting feature there that welcomes people into the plaza. Next slide.
Ian,
And then just some character sketch.
Which seating were you referring to when you said playful seating? Was it the
pebbles on the
life
right hand?
benches? Oh, all right, I see the label now.
Yep.
Cleverly labeled playful
Cleverly
seating.
labeled.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. And next slide. And then our paving materials, the palette. I think one thing that we will be doing differently with the site lighting within the parcel is to do something that's a little bit more sculptural and sort of elemental with those light wands. In the next slide. And then this just talks about the diversity of planting. Don't need to get into the specifics of it, but really it's about native species and having extended bloom periods in a wide range of different species types. Some images of what those would be. And then the lower level planting composition, again, trying to maximize seasonal interest, have extended bloom periods for the pollinators, be heavy with the native species to support the local wildlife. And that's it, I think. Or actually, are these us two? Here's some aerial views that show the character of those spaces. I think they kind of speak for themselves, but you can see the layered approach of landscape moving into the arcade. And then a shot along the front arcade with those shade trees in the plaza, movable seating around it to maximize users' optionality in terms of where they would like to sit, and then transitioning into that covered arcade space on the right. And that's it. Thank you.
So turning it back to the schematic facades.
This is Andrew G. I don't mean to interrupt, but you have 5 minutes left to present. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move through it quickly. The facade concept, we looked at a number of different iterations between a more glass and curtain wall, a metal panel, and then a more warmer sort of terracotta feel. The first is looking at a curtain wall system on the building, a little bit more glassy, maybe in keeping a little bit more with 101. Looking at the elevations, again, the scaling elements on the building themselves that make that transition, in all glass. The north and south, north and west elevations. And then this kind of diagramming of the types of glass that we were looking at, the different options to create sort of that level of transparency. I think in all cases, we're looking at glass that is relatively clear, not going with reflective glass, but really trying to find a glass that has some depth to it. The second option that we looked at was a metal panel and the panel system in the massing. Again, you see the south and the east elevations, north and west. I'm going to move through these relatively quickly because we have some other images to look at. And then the idea of looking at metal as a material that kind of wrapped around the building as that transition. Looking at a spandrel, so a double height system to create a little bit more of a scaling element on the building itself. And then a number of types of metal panel to create that the pattern on the building. We really focused on the terracotta, you know, the idea of the warmth of the material, looking at the south and east elevations, north and west. Again, the idea of having that texture, the depth of the window system itself, looking at two different types of panels themselves to give it a little bit of a moire pattern and texture to the building, creating this kind of shelf that captured each of the terracotta elements. Creating a two-story element with a spandrel panel a little bit closer to the glass color to create that two-story scale for the building. So looking at the overall podium design, again, the idea of taking the lion's share of the plan and having the entry lobby, the e-retail, and arts and creative enterprise space that wrap around the edges, trying to concentrate the more utilitarian pieces across from 101. Again, the idea of base, middle, top, creating that base for the building as far as that kind of cadence of the structure coming down, the scaling of the two-story lobby, and the transition to the middle part of the building. On the northern side, on the thoroughfare side, very similarly, having the retail and the creative enterprise space spilling out, creating that two-story reading to the building. And then along the east elevation, again, you can see the base of the building and the transition to the middle, the idea of the two-story lobby, and the opportunity of having the activity of the retail spilling out, and then the retail module that you see along that edge. To the south, again, looking at the arcade section, the two-story entry lobby and the plaza that really becomes that forecourt to the overall site, and then the four-story treatment, which becomes that kind of setback in transition to the first step. On the northern side, very similar. And then looking at the three dimensions, again, the south side with the plaza that Ian had mentioned, the idea of the arcade and the transition to the two-story lobby. On the looking at the opposite side where we have Earl Street and South Street, again, the forecourt or the entry plaza, the arcade that aligns with the arcade from 101, the more utilitarian pieces along Earl Street, and the transition to the scale of the base of the building. Excuse me. As we pull in a little bit more closely, you can see the plaza itself and the arcade as it transitions. As we come to the other corner of Harding and South Street, this is where we have the two-story entry, the arcade, and the transition back towards the plaza. And as we move down Harding Street, the idea that we have that 33-foot module that kind of demarcates the retail openings, the idea of allowing that to kind of spill out into the street and really visually having that transparency and the opportunity to activate the street. And then as we turn the corner and come to a thoroughfare, this is where, really providing that kind of ample space to spill out and transition from the retail to the outdoor space. Some additional zoning and compliance diagrams. As Ian had mentioned, you can see where we have the building setbacks on both ends, both sides at 15 feet, the arcade, and then the length of the building at 240 feet. Some of the compliance dimensions as well, the 240 feet, the idea of creating that base. We're looking at that transition piece. We're looking at a scaling element at the top that becomes the transition to the mechanical penthouse. And then looking at it a little bit more closely, the idea of the base, middle, and top, the base, and then the four-story sort of setback, the zipper line, the middle of the building. And we're looking at extending the facade up an extra floor to kind of make that transition and take that kind of the curse off of the height of the mechanical penthouse to create a little bit more of a gracious transition, and then stepping the penthouse back from that location. More zoning guidelines. I won't go through all of this, but very similarly as far as the retail store frontage, the two-story kind of activation at the lobby, the transition, the articulated facade, and the two-story scaling elements, the transition of the facade at the top to create that kind of screening element at the mechanical penthouse. And then looking at quickly through the LEED score and on target for reaching the LEED Platinum. And then some of the aspects of the sustainability strategy. So just wanted to complete it there. I'll turn it back to you.
All right, so do we want to start with any questions from the commission?
I had a
Go for it.
I just had a quick question. Thank you for the presentation, David. Regarding the facade concepts, was there a preferred option that your team had?
Yes, the terracotta version. I think, you know, what we liked about that, Tim, was, you know, that kind of very tactile materiality, and the idea that it felt like it was kind of, you know, very rooted in the site and the coloration. So we like this kind of new industrial kind of feel to it, but having that really warmth to the material.
Can we go back to before we start talking about facade options, can we go back and make sure that we've reviewed the massing options? Because that is one of the votes that we do have to take. So if we're good on the preferred massing scheme, then we can certainly dig into the facade options in more detail. So I'm sorry to be a stickler.
So knowing there's a lot of to talk about, I'll just say I appreciate the study and I agree with the preferred massing option.
I think it's interesting that it almost feels like the materiality choice. I mean, you know, the facade, I guess the facade strategy material maybe drove option 3 being the best option, because I think it is the one that has, you know, I think it's an interesting massing study to go with that materiality. I also like the terracotta. That would be my first choice. And I'm wondering if it's because I think it's the one, you know, it works well with option 3, or it can work well. I do have some comments about that. So I feel like you could go for a ride that way. At least that's the way I'm going for a ride that way. That is a material selection. Then I can accept that the 3 is a good strategy for that. I mean, I think it could apply to any of the others. I think it could be. I think it's pretty convincing especially in the south side and the step back there. I have some comments on the sides, but anyway, I feel like it's sort of looking backwards. I think that is an okay option to proceed with.
I am well aware it's a balancing act, but I wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of that, you know, sort of as part of the votes that we're supposed to take. So, all right. Does Tim or Sherry have any comments on the massing before we go back to where Tim had started us?
I would just reiterate that I think option 3 would be a good option, appropriate for the building and site.
All right, then I apologize for that's excellent. We just needed that to make sure we were clear when we get to the voting. So let's move on to the 3 facade options again.
Maybe before we get there, would it be okay if I asked a more general question?
Of course.
It impacts the facade design. I'm curious why the lobby is located where it is, the primary lobby. I understand there's a secondary entrance on the shared street that we just discussed. But I'm thinking particularly about its orientation to the Union Square T-stop, which is what I assume where they're coming by public transit. Most people will be coming from. There's just been so much focus on thinking about that lately with the opening of the station, and certainly that's one of the catalysts for all of the growth in Boynton Yards. And for those coming from T-stop, this would be the furthest distance.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I think part of it is anticipating, you know, what else will be happening along South Street with the realignment and the recentering. You know, I think thoroughfare will be in the early days one of the primary points of movement, and certainly from Union Square as far as a pedestrian movement from the T. But I think when you start to think about eventual development and the realignment of South Street, there will be a bit of a recentering. And I think we were hoping to want to also activate this corner from South Street as well as Harding, knowing that Civic Space 3 will eventually, happen to the north here as well. So, trying to distribute it a little bit. And that's why I think we also located that secondary entry to be a bit of a cut through or opportunity for people to kind of find their way from Thoroughfare through the building as well.
Yeah, I was also thinking about that secondary entrance at the Thoroughfare and kind of what that architecture would represent. There's retail on both sides, and that connection unfortunately just kind of it bifurcates the retail there. And I was also thinking about the pedestrian path as you cut from the Thoroughfare to the site, just what that second entrance might feel like, or if it would be more appropriate to provide more retail at the Thoroughfare and have that entrance more on Harding.
That's an interesting comment, because as we've been evolving it, Tim, one of the things that we talked about is actually eliminating that vestibule between, or creating more of a vestibule between the two retail spaces. So the retail on the inside felt like it was kind of connected. So there wasn't so much of an emphasis maybe on the entry. It was more of a convenience. But the idea that as much as possible, being able to take the two corners and wrap them around and connect them so that there isn't that break. But that's something we can certainly consider.
I do have some thoughts about the facade development. Again, I think the masonry terracotta is a great selection for this site and for what you're trying to achieve, what you talk about trying to achieve with, the reference to industrial architecture, but being contemporary and everything. And I think the separation between the bottom and the top is what I'm having problems with. And I feel like with the concept that you've selected, but with the masonry terracotta, it has a tectonic quality to it. It's a more grounded material than the other two, the metal or the glass. And I sort of wish the upper part of this, especially the sides and maybe the Thoroughfare site, not necessarily the South Street facade, were transformed a little more. They didn't feel as heavy as the lower section does. I sort of, I like the setback again off of South Street and what that does for the facade above, but on the sides, it feels like, I think it can transform. Still be terracotta, still be materially similar, but something about it makes it a little less tectonic. It feels sort of random the way the stepping occurs on it. It feels a little more like it's diagrammatically drawn on as opposed to integrated architecture. But I think that is not a fatal flaw. It's an opportunity for making the building more interesting. Sort of the logic of the stepping, it just doesn't seem to work with the datums that the facade architecture is describing. So again, I think it's as much about transforming the idea of the terracotta on the upper part. But I think the proportions are very good. You know, I find it, especially from this corner, you know, especially from the South Street side, again, I find it very convincing.
I think your comment earlier, Deborah, about the synergies between the massing concept and the facade concept, I think was a good observation. They work well together, and I agree. There's an elegance to it proportionally, and I appreciate the material selection as well. I think Boynton Yards has been kind of searching for an identity that I think can be informed by the materiality of the building, or expressed by materiality of the building. And so I think bringing a more natural, warmer material, terracotta, very high quality material, I think that's a great next step for Boynton Yards, and hopefully that becomes something that helps inform the future growth of Boynton and decision making about materiality. So I think facade option, facade concept C for me. I think my comments, and maybe Deborah's as well, more about kind of the details of it. Maybe one other thing that I just want to note that I think is good is the extension of that upper story to clad the lower portion of the penthouse. I think it both reduces, as you described, it takes the curse off of the penthouse, the big box on top of the building, by reducing its apparent height, but it also creates a clear top to the building with that 3-story piece. It's subtle, but I think it's something that really helps it proportionally as well. The zipper piece, as you described it, is a really interesting piece. I'm trying to picture how it's going to appear from different vantage points. I think everyone, as these buildings have grown up around Union Square, have been kind of surprised to see how they've appeared from different locations, given the low-rise character of everything around it. I'm wondering about the change in plane between terracotta and glass, especially on not the side facing South Street, but the side where the stepping occurs. Is that plane of glass the same plane as the rest of the windows, or is it actually set in?
Yeah, it's very close to the transition.
Was there any exploration of pushing that in further to really reinforce this idea of the break between the upper and lower?
Yeah, we had looked at a number of different iterations where we were pushing it in more, and one of the challenges that we were trying to avoid was not exposing the columns, so that it was very clean. And by having that transfer, it was creating some complications in the overall facade and the structure. So we opted to try and create a little bit of a rim for the gray metal that kind of encapsulates the terracotta as the transition, to simulate that kind of depth, but not actually push it in too far.
I would just add here that it's also an issue with the zoning, that the zoning doesn't allow us to push that glass in further and cantilever the floors above. So we actually had that on the north side where the glass was actually set in to create another terrace and provide a green roof, and then come back with the upper floors above that. But we got rid of it because the zoning doesn't allow you to cantilever over. So we're kind of stuck with this condition.
Is it true?
Unfortunately, that is true. Either the entire thing has to step back, sort of as a step back, or yeah, Rolla is exactly right.
We change that zoning requirement?
That would be not up to me, but up to the city council. So
We'll put that on the list. So I guess just trying to understand the parameters here. The zoning requirement prohibits a setback of a lower story.
Unless it's the arcade form, like there is at the ground floor, an upper story cannot project over the story below. And I know I'm not getting that terminology right, so I apologize.
It's close. You're very close. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So is there again, thinking about the planes of glass on the side and what flexibility there is, because I think it would be a stronger.
So actually, David, if you can zoom in, you have a zoom in of that, and which actually shows kind of what we tried to do with that black rim or lip, if you want. If you can go to that slide, it kind of shows the depth that we're trying to achieve just through that frame. I think there's another slide that has that close up. Keep going. Yep, there we go. So that's kind of showing you in detail why we created that black frame and gave it that depth. And that's something that we're playing with in terms of both height and the depth of it in order to give us that shadow line and create that difference.
That's actually true, because that sort of could be translated as a cornice. And so the projection there is in a different category.
I think one thing that's not super clear is, Deborah, your comment on tectonics of the upper portion. Do you mean that that should maybe be a different material? Because I don't see, no, right? Okay, so maybe I didn't get your comment there.
No, it just feels the stepping feels diagrammatic.
Okay.
Given the nature of the material and sort of sort of the expression of the materials on the base, and then it's and then it's sort of floating above. I don't have a suggestion. I just
it's hard.
I'm looking at it and scratching my head and don't have a suggestion for it right now. But
yeah, it is difficult because it wants to read as like one mass that you kind of pulled apart, and when you pulled that apart to create that scale transition, you created a transparent surface, which is like opening the belly of the beast. But it is difficult. Like
Yeah, a little bit of the explanation too of how we got here is, one of the things that we're working with and very restrictive is the opacity and transparency of the windows, and finding the percentage to meet the energy code. One of the things that we liked was this kind of rigor and the cadence of the regularity of the window. And one of the things we broke was the idea of creating that 2-story element and then transitioning to a 3-story at the top to kind of blur the line between, the top. So it didn't feel like the penthouse was just sitting on top, but there was a little bit of a transition there. And the idea of the 2-story treatment, when we started to add on other pieces to the building, it felt like it was taking away from the kind of the simplicity and the simple elegance of the building mass. And one of the things we liked was the kind of the rigor of the way, the building window cadence happened around the building, and then the kind of a little bit more the playful kind of transition between the scaling and the transition from the 4-story along the south side, and jumping up to the higher transition to the scale of the buildings on the back. So, I think we were a little bit deliberate in the way we were trying to create the simple kind of elegance and not adding additional moves on the building that would kind of draw your attention away from just keeping it very simple.
Along those lines, I'm going to be devil's advocate and lob something out here. Is if there was one less step in the zipper, I wonder if that would get to some of Deborah's points, because then it would sort of be the transition wouldn't be that half story or the, I'm going to call it a half story, the 1-story step at the end, so that it basically respects the 2-story bands that you have.
I think that's a great observation, Sarah. I struggle with it because, again, I think the proportion of the steps works really well now, the width or height of the stepping. But I think, if we were looking at a view from that other side, and from most of Somerville, the most prominent facade of this building for some time until that residential building gets built, it's going to be that other side. And it does, the glass piece is in between these 2-story modules as opposed to just if it could be one less step or it could be one more step too.
I would say regarding the material options, I would agree that the terracotta should probably look really nice. It's a nice throwback to kind of the industrial buildings and give the opportunity for lots of textures and shadows. So I would support what the other commissioners have said regarding the material. I was looking at the elevation along the thoroughfare side. I was just wondering if you had looked at opportunities or what it might mean to open that up more and not have all of the verticals come and hit the ground, just as a way to make it a little bit more open, kind of how it happened at the lobby and on the Harding Street side.
Okay, we can take a look at that.
All right, so we're actually at the 20-minute point of discussion. So I'm going to throw it out there and ask the commission what they would like to do. I mean, I think we can take a vote on the preferred massing. I've heard consistency on that, and I think I've heard consistency on the material, but I don't know that we necessarily have a full-on preferred facade yet, but I'm going to let you guys guide me how I want to motion and vote on this.
I'd be comfortable voting to identify a preferred facade option, but I think requesting some additional study of that facade option.
I would second that.
All right, well, let's do one thing at a time for a second. All right, can I get a motion on the preferred facade? No, sorry, a motion for a preferred massing option.
Yeah, so I move the option 3.
All right, we have a motion by Deborah to approve massing option number 3. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sherry. Roll call vote. Sherry.
Yes.
Deborah.
Yes.
Tim H.
Yes.
Tim T.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that. So we're going with facade option 3. How would you like to proceed on the preferred facade option? Would you like to continue in order to see the changes that have been discussed? Or are you comfortable voting on the facade option at this point?
We'd also need to vote on satisfaction of the design guidelines.
Correct.
So we could vote on the facade option, but continue and hold on voting on the design guidelines until it comes
All
back.
right. Was that a motion, Tim?
Yeah, so I motion to identify facade option 3 as the preferred facade option.
And I'll second that.
All right, motion by Tim, and I think it was, David, correct me if I'm wrong, they were letters, right? So it was C?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just to make sure we're consistent and clear. So we have a motion by Tim, seconded by Deborah, for preferred facade to be facade concept C. Roll call vote. Sherry,
Yes.
Deborah,
Yes.
MH,
Yes.
and Tim T.
Yes.
All right. So then I think we've given some design guidance. So I think the next vote is to continue to the next meeting.
Yeah, I have, just before we take that vote, just one request. When you do come back, could you also have long views of the building so we can see how it's seen
Yes.
from other prominent places? I'm thinking Union Square, Prospect Hill.
And Sarah, is
I
there,
have a minor request too, that perhaps can there be, I know it's done with Photoshop, can we add in the 101 South Street building? Since that's pretty well done. Thank you. Sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the landscape. Is that a separate conversation, or can a comment be made?
Everything from that's on the building lot, we can comment on. From the front plaza thing, as I understand it, there's still a little organization going on within the city as to whether that's a separate lot or how that gets treated.
Okay. All right. I would say just one comment. I really appreciate the boardwalk move across the planting area, and I think how that boardwalk interfaces with the pedestrian zone, super important that it doesn't project past and be, you know, in one of the renderings, which I think was a precedent image more than anything else. I think it was one of the precedent images. It just showed a protrusion that felt like it could potentially be a
Trip.
there it is,
Yeah.
bottom left. Yeah.
Agreed.
But I really like the materiality and the layering that that's starting to offer. I just think the tectonics of it just need to be fine-tuned.
Yeah, and I feel like the north side of the building, in terms of the landscape, expressing or somehow reflecting that there's retail on that side, I don't think is very strong yet. And it might be that I'm scrolling around through the images on my own screen. And I don't like, is it, you know, if there's a food service retail, you know, on the north side, can it spill out? It just doesn't feel that present
Okay.
on the thoroughfare. And it's somewhat the architecture, you know, not necessarily the landscape, but
Okay.
it feels like a back to me.
All right, so motion to come back next meeting.
So moved.
All right,
Seconded.
Have a motion by Tim for the team to return to our next meeting, seconded by Sherry. Roll call vote. Sherry,
Yes.
Deborah,
Yes.
Tim H,
Yes.
and Tim T.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. Appreciate it. And I will follow up internally to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what is building versus civic space and how that will proceed from a permitting and review standpoint to make sure that we can address that at the
Great.
next meeting.
Great.
So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
to
you.
see you. David and Rolla.
All
Sarah,
right.
I have a question for you. These next two, are these the two that I can't vote on because I didn't see the first ones? Is that right?
Yes, one is, so to go back to we'll be going back to the Elm Street, and that is correct. So Andrew Abba will come back. There he is. Ask and ye shall receive.
Say his name and he shall appear.
I know, right? And the other piece of business is just a review of an existing project, so it's not actually a vote. So I think if you want to leave for this evening, you are more than welcome.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I hate to not be a team player, but all right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sherry. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Gautam and Ryan, thank you so much for waiting. Appreciate it. Dive right in. If you want to speak like auctioneers, I don't think anybody here is going to object, so that we can keep on moving. We've already seen this project, so let's, Andrew's giving me the hurry up sign. Carry on.
I've never seen that before. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. We only have very few slides to review tonight. Hopefully, again, as I was mentioning earlier, you see quite a explicit response to the really good feedback that's been quite fruitful through this process since February. I think one of the biggest pieces that came out of the last meeting was a lot of feedback and some criticism on the tectonic of the bookends. And if you recall, we decided last time that the kind of terracotta treatment on those two facades seemed to be like the right idea, but just we're encouraged to help it read a little bit more like a screen. So we have tried to do that to study, how the balcony, we remember those balconies I'll show you in a moment, above the kind of pulled back corner, how those meet the brick. That's certainly something we will take great care with in the detailing. The renderings probably don't do it justice at this point, but I promise we will detail that quite nicely. We talked a little bit last time about wrapping either a brake metal or some sort of ACM panel on the 274 Elm Street base. You'll see that tonight. And then perhaps reconsidering the signage band, removing it in effect, and using a kind of a blade sign condition along Elm Street and on Herbert Street. So wherever those terracotta kind of drawers pull out, we would use a blade sign condition. You'll see that. And then finally, Tim had asked us to study how we might break down the scale on Herbert Street. We're going to show you a couple of views of that and hopefully talk through that. Okay, just reminding you the ground floor plan. I know you've seen this several times, but just to remind you, this is the phase 1 adaptive reuse piece. These are the components that we're proposing that are all facing this very active civic space, which was approved in the last meeting. And then the phase 2 project on the right side of the page, front loading retail onto Elm Street and of course onto the civic space and then onto Herbert Street on the bottom of the screen. You also may notice the bike storage and loading and trash are happening off Herbert Street. You'll see that in a little more detail in the perspectives. So this is where we started in the first meeting we shared with you. This became the most problematic area. If you recall, we were asked to try to somehow dissolve this corner and make it a little bit more inviting. So what we did and last time, just to remind you, is we created a kind of shallower brick pier that you could actually move around, sit underneath, sit beside. And that seemed to be deemed quite successful from you all. So we've certainly kept that kind of porch condition in, facing the very popular Elm Street and attracting people, especially with a kind of place that's covered under the during the elements. This is the piece that we really focused on this time around, adjusting the tectonic, giving a kind of new datum or a new kind of location for all these blade signs that really become kind of wrapped extensions of the columns into the storefront space on the ground floor. But then just really trying to do our very best to treat this like a screen, Deborah, that you had talked about last time, and really relying on simplifying the kind of the read of that tectonic quality into these kind of quite simple and hopefully elegantly proportioned openings. And again, really letting the strength of the material and the tectonic expression of the terracotta itself, using these terracotta panels or the rain screen, there's a tremendous amount of variety in the texture. They can be ribbed, they can be fluted, they can be raked or scored, and they can even be sawtoothed. So you can get a lot of shadow play just across the surface of these things, and you can get quite a rich texture, which we think would be really successful. A view closer where we were last week or 2 weeks ago, and then again trying to separate and simplify that skin as it turned the corner. Let that bookend be something that's read much more like a plane, and then give a real priority to where the signage might go on Elm Street. On the Herbert Street side, similar modes of operation here where we were, where we are now. Again, similar ideas about signage, similar ideas about terracotta and texture. And again, the similar kind of idea that you see on Elm Street with these kind of balconies being carved into the drawer, if you will. This is a view we have not showed you, but certainly is important to the project. This is the view a little bit further down Herbert Street, looking back towards, here's the post office here on the corner. One thing that was asked in the previous meeting is how to break up this facade. We did in fact look at that. This is about 120 feet. The facade on Elm Street is 100 feet, so it's only 20 feet wider. And when we really looked at it, we didn't feel as comfortable with breaking this up or faceting it. We looked at beveling it. We looked at kicking it out. We just felt like it was overcomplicating what we thought was a pretty simple massing move and a simple kind of material palette, where there's a kind of the brick box that's responding to the plaza. There's these drawers that pull out, and then where the loading happens here, and where the kind of bike storage door and the kind of harder working back of house spaces become just a darker blackened steel or a kind of darker gray ACM panel that could complement some of the dark steel details around the windows. So Tim, it's not that we didn't take your ideas into consideration. I assure you we did study it. We looked at it in elevation. You saw this elevation last time on Elm Street. We also wanted to show you this elevation on Herbert Street. There's the 24-foot wider curtain wall, or excuse me, drawer wall on Herbert. And it just didn't seem like we wanted to introduce a new massing move or a new kind of projection or anything to kind of overcomplicate the idea that this kind of brick box turns, comes down, becomes a loading, kind of a loading bay. And then, whenever these drawers pull out, there's this kind of idea that there's a retail component underneath them. So that is the presentation quite quickly. I know we're a little bit late this evening. So I will conclude there and then open it up to you all for feedback.
Can I ask a question about Herbert Street, which is there glazing directly below the screen, the drawer screen, the terracotta screen? I'm trying to figure out where the volume is. It's not an arcade like Elm Street, correct?
No, it's not. It's not. Okay. But Deborah, it's a good question, because we did try to create a different opportunity here that could be an extension of that restaurant, that could have a bit of an elevated terrace for seating and outdoor eating, that could help soften that stair up. You could look, have these really interesting sectional conditions where the ramp happens, the stair happens, and this kind of elevated outdoor seating area.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's nice. And then the glazing is out on top of that, that base wall there. Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, good. I was just curious, and that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It's a good observation. I do think we're gonna have to really study this as we get into the kind of the grading here, where these retail entries happen. We'll certainly continue to study that. And thankfully we have a developer who is extremely savvy in these kinds of conditions in negotiating grades with really active tenants.
Yeah, and then my second question is Elm Street, the existing building on the right side.
Oh.
Yeah. So so that battered brick is yay. Okay.
Yes. And yeah, that was a special order. No, I'm just kidding. We agree. We talked that over, and I think it makes really good sense.
Okay, and it's the same, the black and steel or whatever material you're using.
Correct.
I think that's nice. I mean, it'll integrate it. Get rid of that remnant, that awkward
brick pier thing. Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. Addition. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So on the Herbert Street piece, I appreciate the additional study and the addition of the view you provided. Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with this, your explanation, and this being part of the overall concept and vision for the building. So I think as we have it configured, I'm certainly comfortable with that. I actually had not realized that the loading entry and the bike parking entry was set back and aligned with the brick volume, so it's very helpful to understand that. The level 1 plan, and I just want to make sure about that. The level 1 plan that you had earlier, yeah, there shows them. Looks like it shows the solid black line there, running all the way to the corner. So
yeah, that's a mistake, Tim. Good catch.
Okay.
It jogs like this.
Okay.
And that was really just to try to create a bit of a space for this loading to happen, so it's not happening on the street. We needed a little bit of a transition here.
Okay. No, I think that's helpful as well in kind of mitigating the transition between scales, having that additional setback. I guess one additional suggestion I would just make for exploration, for future exploration, is I think an idea that Deborah had last time, and that's the potential for the terracotta to come down closer to the ground, to the first story on this level. So rather than having it be the 2-story piece, and then whereas what really differentiates this from Elm is there's that more solid portion here, whether a portion of that wants to come down and really ground the building on this side, and maybe it's not coming all the way to ground. You have a stone base.
You mean like here, Tim, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could certainly study that.
Yeah, I think that's just something you could look at and explore, and if you think it's consistent with if it's worth pursuing, just include it with the planning board submission.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Herbert Street, I guess the elevation, and see a little bit of activity on top of it. And I think this is south facing. So I think that would be really a wonderful thing to try to achieve, and maybe landscape it also, to on top of actually up on the, right there. Yeah, so I don't know what's programmed up there, but I think it would be great if it could be, could be a landscaped area and enlivened. It starts to add some activity on Herbert Street. Something's going to happen across the street from that in the parking lot someday. I mean, it was not maybe a hotel. That was somebody's dream, but I do think something will happen probably. Well, at least there's the fair there also.
The farmer's market, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it'd be great to get activity up there. That could
Mhm.
I
Some
think
kind of list would actually
watched,
be nice. Sorry.
yeah, having watched last week's meeting or last time's meeting very, very recently, you guys have responded to almost all of the comments. I'd say the only thing, just as a request moving forward to planning, is if there is going to be access to the retail on Herbert Street, to show an example of how that grade is going to be negotiated, because it's not the biggest sidewalk on earth. And while I understand that you guys have done it before, seeing how that would be approached in a relatively narrow streetscape condition would be helpful.
I just want to note for the record what Andrew had just said, that he has listened and watched the recordings from the both previous meetings where this project has been reviewed, and he is now eligible to vote on this project as we move forward. Thank you, Andrew.
So one additional comment, and I'd be interested in hearing the other commissioners' opinion on this as well. It just has to do with the Elm Street facade. And again, talking about the storefront, which we talked about a few times. I was thinking about materiality of those piers and the ECM panel. I think you described it. It's a aluminum composite panel, dark gray charcoal colored panel. And I wonder about that as the materiality along what is a really active street. After our last meeting, I was going through Davis Square and looking at all the other storefronts, and it's almost all masonry. It's almost all masonry piers everywhere in Davis Square. There's a couple wood storefronts where the pier is wood, but ACM, certainly it's a great material, appropriate for the infill between the windows on the upper stories, but it can get damaged as well over time. And I wonder about its durability and also its kind of tactile quality, whether it has the same. I mean, for a building of this prominence and quality, whether it's the right material to be coming down to grade.
Yeah, and Tim, it's a good point. I should have been a little more clear. You know, we typically will do active storefronts like this with a granite base. You know, sometimes 8 to 12 inches off the ground. So you know, even if it was ACM, it would have a kind of jet black granite base on the bottom where it met the ground, to avoid this exact kind of dings that you're talking about. We could study the piers as a different material. That's certainly something we could look at.
Yeah, I think it could be worth looking at, whether it could be a gray, it could have the same tone, it could be a dark gray brick.
I'd probably say that the metal is a material I often see at retail storefronts, so it's not unusual, but I think given the nature of the street, I think it might be something that you also look at, like a sturdier material, either a stone or a brick or something.
All right. So the two votes on this that we have to take are whether the design guidelines have been met for the commercial core district, in this case, CC4, and whether to incorporate any additional design guidance. So are we ready to take those votes, or is there more discussion or advice?
Rock and roll.
All right. All right, then I need a motion that the design guidelines have been met for the CC district.
So motioned.
All right, so I'm going to say Andrew made the motion and Tim Talon seconded it. Fair enough. All right, so motion to, roll call vote that the design guidelines have been met for the CC district. Deborah,
Yes.
Tim H,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
and Tim T.
Yes.
All right, thank you. The other suggestions I heard for additional design guidance was to investigate the terracotta coming to the ground on the Herbert Street elevation, the possible granite base at the base of the piers. And I'm not sure, I need a clarification on this one as to if the storefront piers on Elm Street side could possibly be brick or stone instead of metal. So I'm not sure if the granite pier bases were on the brick base or we were still talking about the storefront. So I need a little clarification there.
I think it was mentioned that the granite was being provided, whether it's at the brick base or the HDM base.
Yeah, Sarah, that's a detail we do typically in urban conditions, regardless of material above it.
Above it. Okay. All right. Then we'll just leave it as the additional suggestion is granite base at the base of piers.
The suggestion was to study masonry and masonry material, be it brick or maybe even carrying up the stone for those piers on Elm Street.
Okay.
I think we had show the accessibility strategy for the retails on Herbert Street.
Thank you. All right. For retail on Herbert. All right. Is there anything else that we would like to add at this point? I think if we're good, then have a motion to incorporate the additional design guidelines as just summarized.
So motioned.
Motion by Andrew. Do I have a second? Second by Tim H. Roll call vote. Deborah.
Yes.
Tim Hood.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
And Tim Talon.
Yes.
All right. There we go. Thank you, Ryan and Gautam. Congratulations. You are done with us for 2 hot minutes. Gautam sees me more than he cares to actually admit. So
that's not what I hear. That's not what I heard.
It's a pleasure.
So, thank you all. Have a good evening. Unfortunately, the commission has to stay put for a little while. We have one more other business left to take a look at. So
okay,
thank you very much, and
thank you. Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
All right, so I'm going to throw this one to you, Courtney.
All right.
I'm still here.
Our last piece of other business is the 346 Somerville Ave Pocket Park. This is a project that, inclusive of the park, was approved by the planning board pre the zoning ordinance change. And the team, the case was conditioned that the park would need to be further developed with PSUF and according to the procedures that PSUF would like the park to follow. So we have advised the 346 Somerville Ave team to follow the pocket park standards and guidelines as closely as possible that are in the new zoning, and at a minimum to go through the pre-submittal process of having a neighborhood meeting, coming to see you all, and then a second neighborhood meeting prior to the team being able to construct the pocket park. And 346 Somerville Ave is currently under construction, the building at the moment. So this park is conditioned that it needs to be complete through construction prior to the building being able to receive its certificate of occupancy. So with that being said, I'm going to have the team present what they have developed thus far, and you all will be just giving design guidance and recommendation, and we'll close it there, and they will move on to their incorporating any feedback that you've given to propose the final design at their next neighborhood meeting. I assume, Andrew Graminsky, you are still operating things?
Yes, I just promoted a Tim. Tim, are you the presenter this evening?
I'm not the presenter. Natalie Adams is the presenter.
I will make Natalie the presenter. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Natalie, you should be all set.
Can't hear you, Natalie.
You can hear me now.
Muted.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Great. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. All right, let me just try to make it full screen. All right, that's good enough. So thanks everyone for staying so late and seeing our presentation tonight. Well, I'll get right to it. So this is the context plan. Right here you see Union Square Plaza is 6. Lake Street's over here. This is our site. 346 Somerville Avenue comes down through here. We'll see the enlargement on the next page or so. But Washington Street runs here. And this plan's showing you where all the nearby parks are in a half-mile radius. So in the spring of 2019, the developer and the architect for 346 Somerville presented this plan for city approval. And as you can see, the vehicular parking is coming in off of Lake Street here. And they had a green roof and 2 buildings, and they met with the neighborhood, and the neighbors were not pleased. They said it's way too dense for our neighborhood. We don't like the traffic coming in off of Lake Street. And where will the stormwater go? Apparently there's a huge stormwater problem on Lake Street. So in fall 2019, the developers submitted this plan. Well, this is part of the plan for approval, and it has 6 levels and 94 units. No vehicles come in off of Lake Street. The developer coordinated with the engineering department for the city of Somerville for storage tanks for stormwater for 346 Somerville Ave and Lake Street in order to help collect the stormwater from Lake Street. So we forward to spring 2022, and 346 is being constructed, as is 5 Hawkins Street here, is 5 levels and 59 units. And so that we have a approximately 7,000 square feet obligation for the Pocket Park, and there's stormwater tanks under the Pocket Park. There's a pump system with a check valve here. It's going to be here out front, and the city will maintain the drainage system. And we have plus or minus 3 feet of cover over the tanks. There's a new catch basin in front of the property to collect water from Lake Street, and there's a couple of transformer vaults under here. This is a right-of-way. Another thing to mention is this is access to Somerville Avenue right here, and this is also a site analysis, site survey, and for the park. So we have these 6 existing Crimson King Norway maples, possibly a noise buffer here for the neighbor at 15 Lake Street. Here for these lower units, they're at 12. This is up here at anywhere from 17 over here where the right-of-way is, and down here is at about 16. And we also have another constraint is the ladder access to these lower units here. And I think I've covered everything. The next one is a blow up, and you can cover this. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but this is this is the detail from the civils document about what these stormwater tanks look like. And so the site analysis for existing vegetation, these Norway maples, they're King Crimson Norway maples. They're approximately 8-9 inches diameter at breast height. So they're not very old, but we wish to keep them, but there's a lot of construction going on, and the installation of the stormwater tanks may impact them. So moving on to possible tree locations, this bright green signifies the possible location for tree installs here and along the front where these trees are already existing, but everything else is really limited to shrubs, perennials, and grasses. And in March last month, we did a design team meeting with the neighborhood via Zoom, and we presented them ideas, and we were gathering ideas from them. And we presented them gathering spaces and rolling lawns and small scale sports or a dog park. But the overwhelming response from the community was they wanted green space, they wanted trees, they wanted an oasis. And we can understand that because you go down Lake Street and you look at the properties, and you all know how tight Somerville is. Wouldn't this be nice to have on your street? So they wanted green space. So this board looks at the methodology of our planting, and we'll be using native shrubs and plants for our region. One of the standards that we need to follow are unobstructed views to Lake Street for safety. We'll be putting planting beds and lawn areas. They must be bordered by edged, raised edges. All trees must be installed at 2 inches when planting. And then the other factor is plants should be fast growing, resilient, and not poisonous, which the not poisonous aspect is the one that caught us the most. But fast forward, this is our plant list. This is a probable plant list that we've got together for Lake Street. And so all of these meet with that non-poisonous factor that I mentioned earlier. And so here we are at concept A. All right. So the neighborhood wants a green oasis, and they want trees, lawn and trees. That's what they want. So here we've got this right of way here, which continues up to Somerville Avenue. And I wanted to put in places for accessible seating places. So, a lawn isn't considered accessible. It's just, for someone who's in a wheelchair or a walker to be able to get to the park. So this is concrete. It's integral colored concrete and saw cut. And then we have, the things we need by the standards as a big belly trash and recycling station, a water fountain. It needs lights, so we've got lights here and here, and possibly one up here. And this is all accessible at less than 2%. Really, the whole park is. And then we've got the trees in their places. And these trees along Lake Street could possibly be the same Norway maples that are existing, or they could be new. Let's see, did I cover everything? I think so. And I'm just going to move on to, this is the SketchUp model to show you a three-dimensional sketch of the site. And this is looking from the right-of-way down to Lake Street, and the one beneath it is the view from Lake Street. So we're trying to keep it nice and open, and with the bench seating. And the one that I really like about this one is we've got these 3-foot diameter concrete spheres that could be painted by local artists. It could also be a possible park signage component. These metal chairs would be installed, and these wood benches, very nice and warm and nice to sit on, and they have the armrests and small tables, and then that we'd use integral saw cut concrete paving for this design, pervious unit pavers, and then we're using Ridgeline, which is a 9.5-inch height steel curb. And I'll just go back to that so you have the materials in mind one more time. One more look at it. Very angled, very dynamic. The open lawn would be small yard games like frisbee or cornhole, or just for the kids to go out there and roll around, picnic space and things like that. And then the plant beds, we could, the ones close to Lake Street, we could really plant up nicely with some nice perennial plantings, and then shrub up the rest further back, and trees to keep everyone happy. So I'm going to move on to concept B now. This one is, just a typical oval of lawn space, right? And then we get a seating area coming in off the right of way, and a seating area coming in off of Lake Street. And again, the same kind of components we have here, that saw cut concrete paving. It's colored, it's integral, so it's not that blinding concrete paving you see, which is another City of Somerville standard. They want a darker colored concrete. And we're putting nice curbs around these guys here to help hold the edge, but we're using a flex curb around the rest of it, which isn't showing up in this SketchUp diagram. And these are the same benches you saw before, and we have the same elements of the light elements and the trash station and the water fountain. And let's see what else we have here. The scattered chairs, which would be scattered but embedded, and the tables, wood tables, and then the integral concrete, and then the flex curve. And that is, and this last piece, of course, is the lighting piece. And this lighting's by Celux. It's, I'm thinking of something along these lines, not too large, but you see it has the different heads, so you can light up, you can make sure the areas that need to be lit are lit, and you're not getting any light overflow, and they're all dark sky compliant, etc. Now, if I can stop sharing, how'd that work? Thank you.
Natalie, could you actually keep the presentation up so if the commissioners wanted to go back and walk through it? Thank you so much.
I can try. How's that? We'll go back to, oh, I lost it again.
I just have a quick question. On the, what I'm going to call the through block walkway to the plan far right, there were two rectangles shown in what looks like the brick area that are
Right.
lighter color.
That's right, those are the transformers.
Those are the transformers. Okay, so that's the
Right.
transformer vaults.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, and the one further further up the page is hasn't been installed yet. The one towards Lake Street has already been installed. So we're going to have them adjust that transformer up there so that we can have a nice level landing at less than 1% in all directions.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And one other question too. So right where your hand is right now, those are recessed landscapes, and you said that there's a fence, or sorry, yeah, stair out somehow of those?
Right. No, there's no stair out. There's into the units. It's a I guess you'd call them a garden apartment, and they're at level. Their grade is 12, and so the grade of the rest of the park is like 17 and 16 and 15, and so these are down at 12, and they're accessed from inside the apartment. And this is a maintenance ladder for maintenance only. Yeah. And of course, there's a guardrail at this retaining wall. So this is a large retaining wall around here. This space over here is an amenity space with a grill, and there's a fence around it, and there's bike racks right here at this space. Let me see if I can go back to a page where you can get a better view of it. Yeah, right here. So there's bike racks here, and this area is fenced. And this is the rear access to 346. And these are lower level units. Mm-hmm.
And then just to follow up on Sarah's question too, so the transformers are below grade and we're able to just sort of walk over them? Okay.
Right, they're in vaults, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was.
Any other questions?
I had a quick question. In both of the schemes, in terms of just the movement of the sun and the shading of the seating areas, is there one that's kind of either more in shade or more in sun than the other based on what you looked at?
No, I think what that, you know, I've looked at the guidelines about offering shade and sunspots and you know, spots in the sun for people to have, but we're really trying to give the neighborhood as much lawn space as they can, as we can. So you know, this is what I've come up with. Of course, we could make a shady spot, but what's really nice about this park is it's south facing, and I think it's going to get a lot of warming sun, which would only be, you know, I think what, July and August, where maybe this area out here right in the middle would get hot midday sun. But yeah.
Yeah, I was also kind of wondering about, you know, the lawn and maintenance of the lawn, and if parts of the lawn are in sun, or, you know, like how the lawn is just kind of like generally maintained.
Well, this park will be, I think, it's still going through the processes of the lawyers of the city of Somerville and the developer. Tim Corcoran's here. He might be able to answer that better than I, but from what I've heard, that the development team is going to maintain ownership and maintenance of this pocket park.
I think that's kind of currently our preference is to maintain it. We're also the developer of 3 Hawkins Street next door, so we'll be managing both buildings on an ongoing basis. So it was kind of our preference to manage the park and maintain it, but we have not really gotten deep into those conversations yet with the legal team from the city, but will be shortly.
So it's still being studied if there would be like a hose bib somewhere if you needed to hose off the plantings of the lawn, or if there would be like a separate irrigation or none provided.
Yeah, no, there's going to be a hose bib. I just didn't draw it or call it out on the plan, but there will be a hose bib, yeah. And there will be irrigation for the plant beds and the lawn area too.
Yeah, there's our typical setup. I mean, this park will have a drinking fountain, so there will be a water cabinet that are city standards. Typically inside the cabinet, there's a hose bib, and also at times, depending on the model of the fountain, you can have a hose bib on the drinking fountain on the side. So. Any other questions? All right, so I would invite you all, the commission, to give some design guidance to this team. And it seems that they have presented you concept A and concept B. Perhaps you can talk about a concept that you prefer and perhaps how this team could make it better, stronger, more neighborhood friendly. Love your professional opinions.
I think we have two nice schemes here, so that's great. I definitely commend you guys for that. I think I have a preference for scheme A for a couple of different reasons. I like that the space, the usable, accessible seating space is all sort of one zone together. It seems like it's providing a nice alternate to the path system too that ties in. And then importantly, I think that the projection of the lawn into that area in the top, it seems like it's using that space a little bit better. And if for some reason some portion of the planting fails in that zone in the other scheme, that would leave a really large area of nothing, which this seems to avoid. So I think, yeah, I think also the way you've sort of placed the trees around it, it looks nice. It looks naturalistic. It doesn't look like we're kind of just sort of offset planting everything, which is great. So I definitely, I think, again, like I said, both are viable, both are nice. This is probably my preference to some degree. I think that a couple of things that just to note, it does seem like that projection of the lawn seems to be framing something that's not there. So it might be a moment where there's an art opportunity or something else up there that kind of gives that terminal view, something to kind of aim towards. I think I think the seating area is nice. I guess my preference would be we have the pervious unit paving sort of pathway going through it, and it just seems like the whole thing should be that in that area too, just to unify it. It seems a little odd to sort of have the pathway in the pavers and then have the plaza area in the concrete.
Yeah, hold on. I want to interject because because of the concrete chambers underneath, we can't have footings to install the benches. So the benches have to be installed on concrete paving. So that kind of forced this design decision. But I agree with you. Whenever I can do pervious pavers, I do them. But just in this situation, yeah.
It could also just be paver though, that we could install on paver with a concrete.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I will make a note of that. Yep.
But I think that would help sort of unify that. I guess maybe it should have been a question, but it looks like there's some variation in the seating. It looks like there's different modules or slightly different shapes. So a little bit better understanding of kind of the layout there and what it is, because we're only sort of seeing the one version in the example.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the acute angle of the planter, where it comes, the plant bed, that's where the other one actually, sorry, where the two paths come together. One more up, sorry.
This one up here?
Yep, right there. That one makes me a little nervous, just in terms of getting the planting to happen there. And I've seen that sort of angle get sort of bashed a lot. So if that were chamfered a little bit, I think that would help. But other than that, I think it looks great.
Thank you.
The Celux lighting is nice. We've used that as assembly. It looks nice.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew. I think welcomes people from different directions also, and then what I like about it is it brings you into the park with keeping, but still keeps you, as a part of your path if you're going to Somerville Ave. So it's sort of this wonderful little sneaking into the park and then back out of the park. And so I like that that move, that you're both within the definition of the trees, but you're on a path. And I think, and the things that Andrew said also, I think the path being a different material, it's nicer as just a larger space. And also I think the lawn I like it in that irregular shape. It does suggest smaller scale and, and maybe a few activities happening at the same time just because of the shape of it. But no, I think these are nice options. And I also love the ball. I think those could be really fun, and especially if they're given over to the community to personalize, I think that would be really wonderful.
Great, thanks. I think so too.
I would also say that I like the grouping of the seating in the first option, kind of all together. I think that works nice. And I like Andrew's comment about having maybe an object or a folly or sculpture or something kind of in the back, just kind of to draw you back there, or draw your eye, might make something fun back there.
I love follies.
Yeah, I really love this path that's going to connect Lake Street to Somerville Avenue through the block. And I think this scheme by providing another connection to that path just increases the whole permeability of this block. I can imagine someone exiting or using that to kind of cut diagonally across to make their market basket run down Lake Street. I guess my only suggestion is the width of the sidewalk along Lake Street. I guess the edge of the planter doesn't necessarily need to go to the property line, so there's some flexibility there to look at what the optimal width of that is. I think it was,
That's right.
6'7"?
Sure. It's actually 8.5.
Oh, it's 8.5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think it's a really generous sidewalk, and I know over here they made it a bit wider at 5 Hawkins because I think they have some planters over here which aren't showing up on my plan. But I was trying to maintain the same sidewalk width as the neighborhood further up the street, and not and just give more into the park, like funnel people in. But we can explore the width of the sidewalk, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, does it vary between the two schemes? Because on the other scheme, there's actually a dimension on the plan, 6 foot.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is less than. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. It's 6'9". I'm wrong. Yes.
Yeah. So just knowing that there's that wider sidewalk next door, maybe doesn't want to be 7.5. I don't know if we have a standard for a residential sidewalk in the city. I know for Boston Complete Streets, I think it's 7 feet.
Oh, it's definitely 7 in Boston. Yeah. Okay, we can explore that.
Any final thoughts from the commission?
Bedtime.
I would just like to piggyback on the art and folly comments. The Quincy Street open space that we have, that's not too far from here. I imagine that's sort of a good precedent to think about the fencing. So it does abut, 3 residential properties, and it's not a great fence. Like, I'm not saying the fence is the example, but just as a project where you see the materiality, and also it's a project where we have invited artists in the past to do different installations along the fencing. So I think, the comment about including art, in addition to the balls of the sidewalk, but just sort of thinking about, like, as you're walking by, it is a good focal point, or something that you see that might draw you in a little bit more. So just, I would totally agree with that comment, those comments.
Right. It's great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Great. All right. So thank you, commissioners, for giving this team some additional guidance and feedback so they can develop concept A a little more and share it with the neighborhood at their second neighborhood meeting and give that neighborhood a great little pocket park. So thank you, Tim and Natalie.
Thanks. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Take care.
Good night.
All right. On that note, Courtney, would you like to do the honors?
Do I have a motion to end this meeting?
So moved.
Motion by Deborah Fennick. Do I have a second? Seconded by Tim Hood. Roll call vote to end the meeting. Andrew Arbaugh,
Yes.
Deborah Fennick,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Tim Talon.
Yes.
Commission votes to end this meeting of the Urban Design Commission. Thank you all and have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.